confirmed open.
Thank you, Clerk. Okay, members, thank you. Agus tá fáilte roh a lig ar Máidín Gohalín Shaw. You're all very welcome to this morning's meeting, and I call the meeting to order. We do have quorum, so I now welcome all members to the 38th meeting of the Committee for Communities. I please remind everyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection and all devices should be muted, please. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wishing to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no recordings or photographs may be taken. Can I also remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate your Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly in a way which does not interfere with the proceedings, and please be aware of the cameras when using your tablet device. I would urge members to remember to be mindful of the sensitivity of the microphones also. And finally, I'd remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Does any member have any interest to declare in relation to today's agenda? No? Go ahead.
They're on the agenda, but the newspapers I'm a member of Impress.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, and everybody else okay? Thanks. Okay, members, moving on then to agenda item 1. Apologies, Clerk, please, can you advise?
Shan Mulholland.
Shan, thank you. Members aware of any other apologies? No, thank you. Okay, members, then, Chair's business. So, following the meeting on 20th of February, we wrote to the Department to ask what work is ongoing to ensure that arts organisations receive funding letters more promptly in the financial year. That was raised with us across a number of events. The Department has advised that with committee agreement, these queries will be addressed on the 13th of March, that's next week's meeting, at the Historic, Environment, Culture and Creativity Policies briefing, which is coming to members next week. So are members content with that? And do members, I'm sure we are growing increasingly frustrated with the absence of detailed information coming to the committee in relation to the draft anti-poverty strategy. I do wish to note Justice Humphrey's judgment yesterday that the Executive Committee, when one applies, that the Executive Committee, and the judgment states, when one applies the principles set out in the Conroy and Gaeilge cases, the inescapable conclusion is that the Executive Committee is in breach of the Section 28E duty to adopt an anti-poverty strategy. 3 periods of time are noted to be particularly significant in that. It's almost 18 years since the statutory duty was imposed. It's almost 10 years since the declaration was made by Tracy J. And it is now over a year since the Executive Committee was reconstituted. So, members, I know we did seek to elicit some further information last week around the detail of the draft strategy from the Minister, and we are also scheduled to receive an update from the Department at the end of March. But I have noted the Minister's recent comments about taking to the Executive by the end of the month. So I don't know how many more times we need to express frustration that this committee is not getting its place in the sense of being able to scrutinise the draft policy before it goes to the Executive table. So I propose that we write urgently to the Department to ask for a briefing on the draft strategy content, either in person or written briefing, and that should be provided in advance to the committee in advance of going to the Executive. Are members agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
Thank you. Members, I attended the Speaker's, the Ceann Comhairle's event on Tuesday to mark the start of Seachtain na Gaeilge. I would like to commend him for hosting what was another actually very interesting event, because last year's event was really interesting as well. This year's event delved into the history of the Gaelic languages and the history, and really emphasising the need to preserve them, given their central importance across the arc of a long span of history. So a really onerous, I think, responsibility on all of us to preserve them and share them and develop them and grow them, improving our understanding of what we have in common with our geographical neighbours. And I thought that was a fascinating element of the presentation. Seachtain na Gaeilge is the largest celebration of Irish language and culture, with events taking place throughout the world. And throughout Ireland and across the world, and I would encourage members to attend any of the events if they get the chance. Molam de gach dinne páirt a ghlacu in imachtaí Seachtain na Gaeilge le linn an chéile uireatha. On a related matter, I would like to express relief and delight that the First Minister yesterday was announced the process of appointing commissioners for both languages is to commence. So I look forward to hearing more about that appointment process in due course. And of course that comes on the back of the decision recently to allow Irish to be spoken in courts as well. So I think those are all timely and progressive steps in relation to that. So thank you, members, for that. Moving on to item 3, which is the draft minutes. Can I refer you to the draft minutes from the meeting on the 27th of February, which are page 7 of your meeting pack. Are members content to agree the minutes of 27th February as drafted?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Matters arising then, members, at item 4. So you've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 19. I intend, as usual, to go through these items by number and group and ask if you wish to draw out or highlight specific or seek specific items, briefings in relation to any of the items. So can I ask for members' comments in relation to 4.2 to 4.6? Kelly, then Nicola, then Brad.
4.2, in the request that we'd asked about the historic buildings, it's just at the bottom of page 21. Can we get, I know it sort of talks about under the Planning Act that councils can serve urgent works notice. Can we get a bit more detail of what exactly has been devolved to councils? And while it says the Planning Act, do councils have any enforcement powers to force private owners of historic buildings to take on that work? That would be quite useful. The other thing, just then 4.3, the response from Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon Council. Fine, fair enough, I get where they're coming from. However, it does shine a light on the fact that the local development plans and the community plans across councils are not reflective of what central government is looking to achieve. So, for instance, our housing strategy and the homelessness matter, it's not high up on their agenda. Depends, of course, on the number of homeless in that area, but it's something that maybe we could write to the department to ask what clarification is provided to councils on the matters that should be included in their local development plans.
Yep, thank you, Kelly.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I just want to flag 4.4, which is information from the department about supports that are there for the community and voluntary sector for the national insurance liability. So I just want to flag that. I think this was raised before my time in the committee, but I know it's something we've been raising about the pressures that are affecting the community and voluntary sector because of the increase in national insurance contributions. So I suppose it's just to flag it with them that there is support out there, and to have a look at that there. There's a guide there that the department has published from Revenue and Customs.
Yep, thank you, Nicola. Brad.
Yep. In 4.2, in the reply there relating to vacancies within the department, I mean, we've commented on this before. The scale of vacancies: 2,612 declared vacancies at the end of December, 943 for Northern Ireland work, 1,669 for DWP work. I mean, it is a shocking level. And I did ask when we had officials in, was the primary issue a supply issue and the process of recruitment, or was it to do with funding not being in place? And as I recall, we were told a lot of it was to do to funding issues. But it does say there at point 3 in point 1, the third bullet point, where it talks about 943 NI vacancies, some being filled through temporary promotions and agencies. The remaining around 287 NI funded vacancies are affordable and will, when filled, increase the department's overall headcount. So it's not, there is funding in place, for a good element of these vacancies. So it is something I think we should ask for a clearer chart, or over time, so we can track: are the vacancies going down? Is it being addressed? Because I remain not clear. Is it the recruitment process that is not processing quickly enough, or is it funding? But clearly there is funding in place for some of these. So we don't want to be carrying vacancies and having public services suffering.
Yeah, and I would wonder, and we may have received previous information along these lines, but I would wonder, is there specific plan around recruiting, given there's a budget for those 287 and the impact they might have? Is there a recruitment process in place over and above, a generic one or anything specific in that? And potentially, I'm wondering even, is there potential to look at, that the 1,000 jobs and how they were allocated out? Is there potential to look at some of the counties, Tyrone, Armagh and Fermanagh, which didn't get any of that 1,000 new jobs? Is there potential to do a focused recruitment campaign? But I just wonder what strategy the department have on recruitment, given all of the challenges. Maybe seek some more general information in relation to that, and more specific information in relation to, is there any detailed recruitment going on for those 287?
And specifically, Chair, could we ask for if they could chart the number of vacancies? And I know sometimes the distinguish between DWP and Northern Ireland work-focused vacancies, but say from 2019, because we know that, or 2018, we know that COVID had an impact on all public services, but just so we can see how that affected, and is the chart coming down since then?
Could I just add on to what Brian's saying there? The recruitment is an issue, but also the amount of people who are leaving existing jobs is an issue. I wonder, in that table, can we maybe ask, what is the outgoing number of people? We know that there will be retirements, but there seems to be a significant number of people leaving the civil servants, which is quite unusual, or moving to different departments. So it might be useful to get a comparator, because they could actually be doing good work and replacing staff through recruitment, but then the other staff that are leaving, at the balance there.
Yeah. Just a point on an issue that Kelly raised there, and that's the local development plans and the community plans. Can we write to each individual council and ask them for an update on where they're actually at and when they intend to finish the local development plans? I don't think there's the same sense of urgency across all councils.
Yeah.
I think we were doing that last week.
What item is that? Yeah,
Did that last week.
yeah. We have that.
action
I
last
think we have that request out.
We have just sent that letter
Yeah,
asking
okay.
them for an update on their local development plans.
And one of the items that we have asked the department to do an informal briefing on is around the staffing issue. And one of the things I think it would be keen to, given Kelly's point there, would be keen to see, are they formally doing leaver interviews to assess why people are leaving?
We've asked
We've
that
asked
as
that.
well.
I thought it was already.
We have asked that.
I think they have indicated they are doing some of them, but it will be keen. I'd be keen to know, have we got any information back as to what that's telling them?
I can ask that to be followed up and included in the briefing session.
Yeah.
that'd be grand.
Yeah.
See if the great retirement is impacting this.
Yeah, but it will be good to get under the bonnet of what exactly is putting the pressures on there, because we need to be alert and alive to it. Okay, just on 4.5 there, members, I wanted to flag up the TEO email response. I'm a bit, I have to say, taken aback at the reply. It's in response to comments that we had sent to in support of the Minister in relation to support for wastewater investment. So in order for more social homes to be built, it almost suggests that we shouldn't be writing to TEO. However, given the fact that it's so integrated and cross-departmental, the issue of housing, I think that was appropriate, but I want to know just if members have any thoughts. Kelly?
I have to say that when I read that, I actually wrote on it, so much for executive strategies. The housing strategy is being led by communities, but it is an executive strategy. For this type of comment to come back just highlights to me the silo working. I have grave concerns that the objectives that we're trying to achieve with housing, if the executive is not buying into it, and that's all of the departments then and all of the ministers, then what hope have we to achieving it? I don't know what to do with this, because it's so obtuse. It just flags to me that there's an issue within the executive office and their understanding of what an executive strategy is.
Yeah. Well, members content that we write back just and express or flag that, that we believe that this is a key issue that will need an executive focus.
Might it not be the case that we should write maybe to the Minister of Infrastructure and clarify it with them first and foremost?
The committee has written to the Minister for Infrastructure before, and this letter was in committee writing to First and Deputy First in support of the Minister.
Yeah, ministers. Yeah.
Yeah, to bring forward the housing supply strategy, but acknowledging the key link with the wastewater infrastructure, and to prioritise that at an executive level so social houses could be built. But we've been asked to bring it back, to send it just again to the Infrastructure Minister.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brian?
I wonder, it's just a
Go
case
on ahead.
Go ahead.
clarifying lines of communication here in a sense, you know, to see just where in fact does the buck stop.
Brian?
Well, I mean, we all agree we want to see more housing, want to see wastewater infrastructure, more funding, you know, to enable greater development. But in terms of who we write to, I suppose it's an issue that we're the committee for the executive office. We're not.
Communities.
Apologies. Yes. Right. No.
The other hat though.
I'm thinking about yesterday. Right. Well, that's what I want to refer to.
Yes.
But the executive, it is the committee for the executive office. It's not the committee for the executive committee, as in the committee of ministers. You know. So, although we were writing, wanting to put pressure on the executive, or to lobby the executive as a whole, to say, look, we need more funding for water infrastructure. But I think that's why TEO officials have written back and say, well, TEO is, as I say, is the executive office as a department with certain responsibilities. That committee doesn't have authority over the executive committee, as in the committee of the ministers.
But we're not
That's how I
writing.
view it.
Do we write to the committee or to the
No, we wrote to the
office?
minister.
To the office, that's separate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the point of an executive strategy if they're all taking their hands away from it as soon as we're asking for support for it? I don't know. I know what Brian's saying. Would there be any point in writing to the committee, the executive office? Probably not, if this is the reaction. But who's the oversight over our executive and their strategies if they're not prepared to?
Yeah, I
Support
think understanding those lines of communication and how the accountability and how the cross-departmental nature of a lot of these issues is reflected and brought forward is a important point. So,
Sorry, would it not be prudent to go to finance, given
Well,
that it is fundamentally a finance issue around investment in the wastewater infrastructure?
well, the interrelated nature of including finance is why I thought the executive was the correct place for it, because finance could legitimately say, well, this is also an issue for infrastructure, and so it is the cross-cutting nature is what. So I think going collectively was to me a stronger position than Melissa.
I still just have a sense of pass the parcel here, and that's what's actually happening, and we need to nail that one down first and foremost, you know.
To be fair to Malaysia, you know, the Minister for Infrastructure, you know, depending on what is allocated to that minister is whether or not, you know, this goes forward. So when we write to First Minister and Deputy First Minister, you know, as the reaching out to the executive committee and they kick it back and go, you need to write to infrastructure, it's not really good enough. You know, it's do they not have any cross-departmental discussions at the executive committee level? You know, in trying to achieve the housing strategy, we need this investment.
Yeah, but just on that, what I think that in writing to the Department of Infrastructure is that clears the lines here, and that then we can go back then full-blooded and say, wait a wee minute now, you know, someone has to start stepping up to the plate here in terms of giving us the information that we're looking for. You know, if we write to the Department of Infrastructure and they turn around and say, well, really, you should address that to TEO, you know.
Yeah.
And I suppose in terms of the role of Hawks as well in support of the executive, you know, in support of the executive committee, is that a potential location to progress this?
So if we can take it step by step,
Yeah.
we could agree, first of all, to write to the Minister for Infrastructure, explain that we've attempted this, the committee has already attempted this first step, and can we clarify the route to take the question regarding the wastewater infrastructure in support of social housing,
Yeah.
and then based on that response.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Members content with that approach?
Yes.
Okay, Clerk, content? Yep. Okay, members, then, can I ask then if there's anything else in that first section? And so we were dealing there with 4.2 to 4.6. Members content with that. Moving on to 4.7 to 4.11. Are there any items there that members wish to flag, Kelly?
4.7. The information that's been provided from the department is all well and good, but it doesn't provide us with any outcomes, the results of those programmes. Programme for government is and has been in the past based on outcomes. It's just if we can write back and say thanks for the information so far, it is very helpful, but what are the outcome measurements? What has been achieved by the investment? Has there been a change on paramilitary activity in the local area? In 4.8, Chair, actually you covered...
Just let me get check the committee content with that proposal. Yep, and then go ahead, Kelly.
4.8, it was to... actually, what you mentioned earlier, in light of the judicial review, is this still the case with that the response that we got in 4.8? So, you know, whether or not to include poverty reduction targets, given the fact that the Executive Committee is now being urged to continue with an anti-poverty strategy.
Yeah, so what's the question in relation to that, Kelly?
It's just maybe to write back to... probably the Minister for Communities and the Minister for Finance, given in light of the judicial outcomes, will there now be an inclusion of poverty reduction targets?
Yep, members content with that?
Well, earlier on we've agreed to write a letter asking if we can urgently receive either an oral or in-person briefing. Are you happy that that would be included in it?
Not perfect,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because it will be important to know if the Department for Communities are setting targets and then what the executive do about that. So does the draft contain targets?
And it's for inclusion in the anti-poverty.
Yeah. Melissa, were you looking at that?
Just on the same theme as well too, and it's clear from the ruling and that both the deputy, the first and deputy first minister and the minister for communities have been exonerated in a sense in terms of them being seen to be in any way holding up the development, we'll say, of a policy here. So once again, to ask the same question, you know, who is it that, or where is it that we have this blockage, you know? And is there any way we can get clarity on that? In fact, who is it that will be leading on us to bring it forward onto sort of fulfilment as such as a strategy?
Yeah. Yeah, and seeing the draft is, you know, understanding what's being put to the Executive Committee in relation to this is crucial.
So can I confirm what are the barriers to bringing the draft forward?
Yeah.
And who will be in the lead role?
Yeah. Members content with that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just wondering, you mentioned Hawks earlier. I wonder if it's process more so than asking ministers. I wonder if it's worthwhile asking Hawks just to clarify when a strategy is produced as an executive strategy, while there may well be lead ministers and departments for that strategy, what is her understanding of what an executive strategy and who's responsible for it?
Yeah, because like one way of addressing that will be that the lead department remains the department that holds the other departments to account in there. But it's not clear that that is the case, and I think that does need bottomed out.
It's one of the things, just to reiterate on that, and it follows on from Melicia's point, you know, who does the buck stop with? We saw it in the sign language, the draft bill that has come forward, where the Department for Communities, while bringing forward the Act, cannot compel other departments to do things. And our committee structures are set up in a way that we can only investigate committees as opposed to outcomes or themes. So it does pose a question. For instance, if the anti-poverty strategy has cross-cutting elements to it, will we be able to monitor and examine that appropriately, given the fact that it could well involve health, education, you know?
Yeah, and crucially, if that's not the case, then who will? Because the thing is, how can communities continue to lead if other departments are saying, well, that's not up to us because we're not the lead department? So I think there is a need, and it's been very clear from a lot of reports that that's an issue that needs clarity.
So we're writing to, as a committee, to the head of civil service to seek clarification regarding scrutiny of an executive strategy.
Yeah.
I think so. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, members, so no other comments on 4.7 to 4.11 then. I'm moving on to, just to note that in 4.7 the response refers to an earlier letter which has now been included in table papers at page 5. Okay.
Yeah.
So moving on then to items 4.12 to 4.13, members, anything in there? Yes, Kelly?
Just going to say that review of the disabled facilities grant, it's a wee bit disappointing that they're cracking on ahead with a recruitment for a new warranted builders scheme without having reviewed the last one. It does seem to suggest that everything is rosy in the garden. I don't think there's one of us around this table, if we've any dealings with disabled facilities grant, that it has been a good process for the people that are involved, the beneficiaries. So I'm a wee bit concerned that lessons learned will not be taken forward. I don't know whether we could please write to the Housing Executive Research Team to ask them what lessons have been learned from the existing process that will be fixed with their future plans.
Yep, members content?
To the Housing Executive Research Team, did you
Yeah,
say?
they seem to be the people who
Okay.
are doing this periodic customer satisfaction surveys.
Thank you. In terms of 4.12 there, members, affordable warmth and ERDF replacement mitigations response. So it states that following the UK's exit from the European Union, the Department took part in exercises to establish the impact of EU funding streams coming to an end. However, no replacement funding from the UK Government was confirmed for this specific project, and the carbon saving scheme ended on 31st December 2024 on completion of the planned programme of works. There has been no direct engagement by DFC with the UK Government in relation to replacement of the energy efficiency in social housing project. DFE was the managing authority for ERDF here. So I think we maybe should write to Department for Economy to request any information as to whether they are taking forward any alternative or mitigating schemes or finance in relation to that important area, because it's disappointing that there has been no direct engagement from DFC, but clearly DFE have a role. So would members be content we write to flag this up and ask DFE for a response? Yeah. Thank you, members. Okay, members, in terms of table papers, anything there? Go ahead, Brian.
Just under 4.13, I should declare an interest there. I'm a member of the Greater Shankill Partnership Board, which receives neighbourhood renewal funding. Just seeing there's that item in correspondence there.
Okay,
That can be noted.
thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. Tabled items then, members, 4.15 to 4.16. Any items within that members want to flag or discuss? No? Thank you. Members content. So members therefore content with the memo as tabled and as discussed. So moving on then to agenda item 5, members, correspondence. The memo is at page 88 and there's a tabled correspondence memo at page 16 of the table papers. I'll go through these items by number and group and ask viewers to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item of correspondence. So in terms of 5.2 to 5.7 there, I want to flag up 5.2, which is from Homeless Connect and CRISP. And I just think that's of significant concern that we should forward that to the department for a comment in relation to that matter, if members are content.
Yeah, great.
Anything else in 5.2 to 5.7, members?
I think 5.6, I think we should go on ahead and get a briefing.
Yeah, members content? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, members, then moving on to items 5.8 to 5.12. Anything within that section? No, members content. Per the memo. And 5.10, 5.10, I should have drew attention to ERA committee call for views. So that's asking the committee if we are content for the team here to review that bill and, if appropriate, draft a response for member review at a future meeting. If members are content with that.
Great.
Thank you. And items in tabled items then 5.14 to 5.21. Any comment or queries, members? Brian?
Just to welcome the announcement from the Minister on the intermediate rent model, that a provider is now being appointed, connected to Choice Housing Association as a subsidiary. I would be interested in a briefing on that at some stage. I know there's some of the details have yet to be finalised and so on. So maybe when there's a bit more meat on the bone, regarding including areas where it will roll out. But it is a new model, through Financial Transactions Capital, with a loan provided to private sector to deliver reduced rent product. But it's another means of providing more housing and for lower income families. So.
Want us to seek a briefing after 6 months or in a quarter? Or?
Well, I suppose when we feel we'd need to monitor when there's a bit more certainty about arrangements. At the moment, I know there's various elements have yet to be worked through.
Although it's been announced, the actual product itself, it's those details we would like to say. I was in contact with Michael and he says we're not ready yet to say anything.
I wouldn't want to.
Appropriate time.
I prefer not to leave it too long.
Okay.
I think it's just interesting as a model.
Probably if we write to Maple and May and ask them for the details of how the intermediate rent scheme will work, and then they'll come back whenever they've got it thrashed out, because it's very good. Yeah.
I don't have the number in front of me, but well, I do have it. If I can find it. 300 new homes over the coming years, but the areas have yet to be decided. So I wouldn't want to leave it 6 months. Maybe within 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
Yep. Members content? Andy?
It just, on Brian's point, it does say there that some of these should start to be built as soon as next year. So I think maybe it'd be prudent to go back to the department saying, given that some of these are due to start as soon as next year, they must obviously be close to detailing the locations of these.
Yep.
Yeah. Certainly before the summer break, if we can get a briefing.
Okay. Content, Clerk, and members all content with that?
Yeah.
Okay, anything else in 5.14 to 5.21? Otherwise, members content? Okay, thank you, members. Moving on then, members, to agenda item 6. So we have a copy of the briefing paper at page 426. A copy of the correspondence that we received from an individual last week has been included again there for members' convenience at page 429. And I now welcome the following officials to our meeting. So, this morning we're joined again by Emer Morelli. You're very welcome back, Emer, who is the Deputy Secretary of Engaged Communities Group. Catherine Hill, who's Director of the Active Communities Division. Joanna Gray, Head of TNI AFF, and Willie Davlin from Sport NI, Sports Infrastructure Expert. So thank you all. So Emer, would you go ahead and please make a brief opening statement, then we'll move to questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for inviting us to brief you on the Northern Ireland Football Fund this morning. So as you know, I'm Emer Morelli, Deputy Secretary for the Engaged Communities Group, and I'm the Senior Responsible Officer for the Northern Ireland Football Fund. I'm joined today, as you say, Chair, by my colleagues across the table. The Northern Ireland Football Fund was conceived in 2011 and used to be called the Sub-Regional Stadia Programme. Minister Lyons issued a written statement to Assembly members in May 2024 to advise them that he had approved an overall policy framework through approval of a strategic outline case and changed the name of the programme to the Northern Ireland Football Fund. The fund includes 3 strands which reflect the original executive approval granted in 2011, but which need to take account of the changed Football League setup and a more recent assessment of need. There's a performance programme strand, a grassroots facility programme strand, and the creation of a national football centre with the Irish FA. Work is underway to develop policy proposals for grassroots, and the Irish FA have submitted an initial business case for a national football centre. However, this morning we are concentrating on the performance programme strand at the committee's request. The performance programme is designed to invest in modernising performance club grounds located across Northern Ireland. The TNIF team has undertaken significant sectoral engagement, evidence gathering, including commissioning comprehensive ground surveys to inform the policy framework which underpins the performance programme. The programme was designed in partnership with stakeholders. An advisory working group has been meeting regularly since 2021 and includes representation from the Irish FA, the Northern Ireland Football League, the Chief Leisure Officers Association from local government and Sport NI. The team has also worked closely with clubs and surveyed local communities, benchmarked with other jurisdictions and sought extensive expert and professional advice. The committee received a written briefing on the performance programme in October 2024, which set out the need for investment and the proposed policy framework. This included outcomes, the application criteria, partnership funding requirements, and also included the proposal for local authority applicants to provide a minimum of 40% partnership funding and clubs to provide a minimum of 5% partnership funding. That briefing set out the programme level business case, which was expected to pass through the approvals process from October to December 2024, with a view to launching a call for applications in January 2025. The programme level business case was subsequently approved in December 2024, and the call for applications was launched on the 30th of January 2024, with applications, 2025, with applications to be submitted by the 14th of March 2025. Just on that point, the committee will note the application process has not yet closed. The performance programme is designed to achieve outcomes across three key areas, which are footballing need, community benefits and financial sustainability. The application process is designed to test projects' ability to deliver these outcomes, and there are a number of essential criteria which applicants must meet, otherwise their applications will not be considered. And these are the basic pass or fail requirements. Only owners of grounds can apply, and in practice this means either performance clubs who own their own ground or owners of a ground who are not the club can apply but must do so in association with the performance club. Ownership means either a freehold interest in the ground or a long lease with at least 25 years still to run. It is recognised that some clubs who currently ground share wish to establish themselves at a new home ground, and these clubs can also apply on the basis that they will own or have in place a long lease by the time they come to deliver the construction stage of their project. The ground in question must demonstrate a need for public investment. The applicant must not be able to afford to deliver the project without public funding support. Applicants must be prepared to part fund their project's costs, and I'm aware the committee has a particular interest in the partnership funding requirement. If the chair is content, I can provide detail on that now or take questions through the session.
Yeah, we'll take questions through the session, yeah.
On the application process itself, what will the application test? So the application form is designed to test the benefits a project can deliver in line with the agreed programme objectives. There are three sections which score points as follows. Section 3, which is footballing need. Section 4, benefits. And Section 5, finance. And this section considers previous investment, proposed financial contribution and future sustainability. Previous investment made by applicants is not usually considered in applications for public funding and cannot be included in the project business case. This is because business cases are prepared to underpin decisions about expenditure which has not yet been incurred. Feedback, however, from stakeholders was that some organisations were compelled to proceed with investment in their facilities, given the period of time which had elapsed since the original executive approval in 2011. This meant they were unable to hold funding which might otherwise have contributed as partnership funding. In recognition of this point, the performance programme's applications provides applicants with an opportunity to score points per previous investment to deliver capital improvements. The application process is designed to be as fair a method as possible to score and rank projects in merit order to determine which will be taken forward for support first. It is designed to allow all applicants to make the case for their project across a broad range of diverse criteria. However, and this is a very important point to note, not all projects will be able to score points in every section of the application. And the applications themselves will be split into three groups. Tier 1, which are projects with a total project cost up to 1.5 million. Tier 2, projects with a total project cost above 1.5 million and up to 6 million. And Tier 3, projects with a total project cost above 6 million. Projects will be scored in rank in each tier, so smaller projects will essentially compete against other smaller projects and so on. Scoring will be undertaken by departmental officials in line with the published scoring criteria, and this will include a moderation stage, which is a common feature to ensure fairness and a robust process. The scoring and ranking order will then be set and will not be altered after this point for the first round. Officials will also engage with professional and technical colleagues to consider available budget, market conditions and project complexity. A sectoral panel may also be consulted to consider sectoral issues and take on board advice. Finally, recommendations will be made to the Minister on how many projects from each tier should be taken forward. The projects selected to form the first cohort will proceed to a due diligence stage to develop or finalise their project business cases. Due diligence is an essential part of the process and will consider club finances, legal issues like title and feasibility of projects. Feedback from the due diligence process will inform clubs as they finalise their business cases. After the application process is complete, projects will proceed based on the state of readiness. It will take time to deliver these projects to a high quality, but the programme's intent is to deliver a fully transformational change for sport and for communities. I hope this has helped address some of the issues raised by the committee regarding a number of issues, and as I say, we'll revert to partnership funding now. Thank you, Chair, and we're happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Emer. And I am, I suppose, particularly interested in that partnership level funding, given the issues that has raised. So the original sub-regional model had partnership funding at 20% as opposed to 40%. What was the rationale to change that level, and what evidence was that based upon?
So, as you say, we are seeking a defined minimum level of partnership funding, and I would stress minimum contributions. If clubs or councils can provide more, they should. Public sector funding should be, we should be the funder of last resort in this area of investment. So the 5% partnership funding for clubs was set following detailed financial scoping work, and it was undertaken to assess clubs' ability to contribute to project costs. The minimum 40% funding for council applicants was set following benchmarking work and engagement with stakeholders, including councils, through the Local Government Chief Officers Association. It's also benchmarked against other precedent, for example, Sport NI's Multi-Facility Fund and the IFA's Grassroots Facility Fund, both of which have been running for over 4 years, require councils to provide at least 40% match funding, with other applicants required to provide 20% and 10% respectively. So while there was a position set in 2011, we have had to update the context, the environment that we're operating now in. We've engaged very, very closely with stakeholders through the development of this programme. So it's not a new number coming unexpectedly out at this stage to our stakeholders. The 40%, as I say, has been tested across the piece.
Well, I suppose I'm conscious just that they are also operating in a very straitened environment, and I'm conscious, you know, for example, the rate support grant has reduced, and that you know, councils are also failing. So I'm keen to understand what engagement you had specifically with councils in advance of bringing this forward.
So we have a sectoral group which is councils are represented on by the Chief Leisure Officers Association. I think we take your point about affordability, but we have to also make the point that the partnership funding is a minimum contribution. So we will still have to test affordability for all applicants to ensure that the department is a funder of last resort. We're expecting councils to be able to fund at 40% for projects that they might put forward, but we'll still need to test whether or not that is actually the minimum amount that they can contribute.
Okay, I'm going to go to our Deputy Chair, Nicola Brogan.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose just back on that there point about the 40%, I'd like to know what engagement you've had with councils. You know, in previous years, from 2011 when this fund was first talked about and agreed at executive level, what engagement you've had with them throughout the process, which led then to now, because although you're saying that councils should be aware of this here, to me it seems like it's come to a complete shock to them. They've had 5 weeks to prepare from whenever this announcement was made on the 30th of January, that now they've got 5 weeks to get whatever amount of funds is needed. In the case of Derry and Derry Strabane Council, their bid, I believe, was around 10 million. That means they have been told to look for £4 million in 5 weeks. Like, that's completely impossible for them, especially when the rate support grant has been cut from the council as well. I don't know where they're supposed to get that their funding from. So I'd like to know what engagement you've had with them, even specifically, leading up through the whole process. And to the decision of making this here 40% that the council would have to contribute, as opposed to 5% for club-owned grounds.
Okay, so there was public consultation on the programme in 2015, which obviously, you know, we received responses from right across the spectrum of public sector bodies and the sector itself. We've continued to engage right throughout the period from the original executive endorsement for this programme, and that's included working with mainly the Chief Leisure Officers Association representatives of councils, but we know that they have been engaging then with their own colleagues and elected representatives at council level.
Sorry to interrupt, but during those discussions, those engagements, had you made it clear that it's likely it's going to be 40% contributions from 2015 from those engagements?
Not from 2015. As the chair mentioned, in 2015 the proposals at that time did talk about a 20% contribution, but it didn't talk about a differential for clubs or councils. I think at that time there was an expectation that councils might be eligible to apply. Obviously, having looked at the current situation and the need to ensure that we are having owners of grounds apply, we had to open that up to all potential organisations who own the grounds.
When exactly were the changes to the matrix announced, and when were councils or those involved with the bids, when were they made aware of that there? How much notice did they actually get?
So we've been working with councils through our sectoral group since 2021. The 40% has been a standard requirement through both the IFA grassroots scheme and Sport NI's capital infrastructure schemes for many years. So the 40% has always been assumed to be a standard requirement in our discussions with the councils. The policy framework was signed off by the Minister in May 2024. So that was at the point at which we were able to say we now have a firm footing in terms of ministerial approval to work on this basis. So from that time they'll have been aware that the partnership funding was going to be set as a minimum requirement.
And you'll know that some of the councils are obviously finding this very difficult and are now, the thought of having to get, especially for Derry and City Strabane Council, Derry City and Strabane Council, the 4 million I've mentioned, and they've asked for an extension of the deadline beyond, I think it's 15th of March. I know that so far they've been declined at their extension, but is there any movement on that given the circumstances around it?
We haven't actually formally declined it. No one has formally asked us for an extension. We've had a letter from the Mayor which we've just responded to explain the rationale for the partnership funding and to ask for any further detail on the concerns that they've raised. But no, we wouldn't expect to extend the deadline.
I think this committee formally asked for an extension to be considered at our meeting last week or the week before.
We agreed to write to ask that it would be.
We have. I'm not sure that we got that in writing, but of course we take it under consideration. But we would need to have a clear rationale as to why to extend a deadline for a competitive scheme.
I think the rationale is there, the fact that this massive bid that one group have been working on for years, is suddenly it's been taken away from them because they can't come up with the 4 million. So I think that is a good enough rationale in that case. But you can have another.
Maybe just to clarify, we're not requiring 4 million to accompany the application. And as Joanna said, the 4 million will have to be identified as a contribution or as a commitment from the council going forward. But I would just be wary that we're not saying in this financial year, for example, in the rate support grant that's available now.
Yeah.
And also, as Joanna said, when the applications do come through, and as I say, we have to be very careful. This morning we want to be as open and transparent as we can. The process is still open at the moment. So talking about individual clubs, we will give as much information as we can, Chair, but we don't want in any way to be seen to be influencing that application process that is still open and live. But as Joanna said, once we see those applications, we will be engaging. And the uniqueness of this actual programme and how we working it through is the very, very close engagement we have had with all the clubs through this Willie's here as our expert from Sport NI, but we have had one-to-one meetings with each club. We have spent and invested a lot of time in the stakeholder piece. We appreciate how long everyone has been waiting for this, and we want it to be right. So it's to give that assurance that we are not plucking things out of the air at the last minute to try and put into a process. There has been engagement.
It's an important point about the partnership funding not having to actually be in place until construction phase of a project. So an extension wouldn't give the council an additional period to raise the funds. They can do that over the period of design and planning.
Have you, just finally, Chair, have you had any other concerns raised to you from any other groups regarding this?
We have had, of course, we've had feedback from clubs, generally around criteria that don't suit their application. That's pretty natural in a competitive process. The application was specifically designed to have a very broad range of areas under which applicants could score, because we wanted it to be open to all of the performance clubs and give every club a chance to make a case in an area that might be their strength. But that naturally means that there will be some areas in the application form which other clubs will find they can't make a strong case in, and some have raised concerns that they can't score points in every section, but that's actually there by design.
Right, thank you for that there. Thanks.
Thank you. And just to clarify, so we raised that and asked the Minister last week, it is around the potential for a delay to the deadline to allow that fuller consideration. We had also previously requested that would go in, and that letter is going through our clearing process. But we are very clear that we have put that on the agenda for consideration. Daniel?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just to supplement a number of points that my colleague Nicola Brogan has made. There is quite a bit of frustration and angst about this process, particularly the original consultations, 2015 you said? It's 10 years ago, so it's quite a protracted period. There's been a lot of uncertainty in the mix in that, and now in 2025, 2024, the Minister makes a decision, so you can understand why councils would be quite annoyed about this, because it's been lingering, I suppose, in the ether for quite some time before an actual decision was taken by a Minister.
Indeed.
So there's a fair amount of annoyance about that, and rightly so, which is why I think, given how this process has been handled, and albeit not handled well, to be blunt about it, there needs to be some discretion around councils. Councils are the local representative bodies that look after the local ratepayer. There's going to be a lot of people affected by this. Derry and Strabane has, as Nicola Brogan rightly pointed out, requested an extension. I, as an MLA for that area, have written to the department and have not had a reply as of yet. This committee has done the same, and other MLAs too. So this is a matter of considerable concern, and it's going to have an adverse effect on the ground for the people that we represent, particularly in Derry and Strabane, might I add, because they've been so badly affected by the cut to the rate support grant. But so the question really is around, do you think there will be any flexibility or discretion around the potential extensions for councils in order for them to get their houses in order, or at least to look at the percentage that is required?
I would just have to reiterate that point, that the partnership funding does not need to be in place by the closing date for applications. The application is designed to test projects on their merit, but it does ask applicants to set out how they would propose to get the partnership funding in place that hasn't yet been secured.
Would that not put some projects at risk in terms of uncertainty as to whether the funding could be acquired or raised?
Yeah, well, but the risk then would be shared by both the department as the funder and the project as the potential grantee, on the basis that we would then start working with projects to develop their designs, get their statutory approvals in place so that they could move to a construction stage. Because we understand that for many applicants, it's not possible to get all of their partnership funding in place up front, because often funders who might provide partnership funding for other funders, for instance, other public funders or philanthropic funders, will expect projects to have been developed to a fairly well developed stage and might not be prepared to fund until planning permission is in place, for instance. So we recognise that, and that's why we've given applicants the opportunity to set out in their application where they might expect to raise that funding from, but not have to actually have it as cash at hand at this stage.
There's very little levers available to some of those councils except for increasing rates for local ratepayers, unfortunately. Is that going to be the consequence of this?
You could potentially access other funding schemes.
Potentially, but okay, thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Morris.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I welcome the outworkings of the football fund, and I am especially delighted that council-owned grounds will be funded to have a fantastic facility on behalf of the ratepayer, which will be owned by the ratepayer, whereas the other grounds are owned by or leased by. The fund is overdue, probably why we've been consulting since 2013. It hasn't been put out in a timely manner, and that has delayed everything. Any further delays, in my opinion, and Chair, I must declare I'm a volunteer at Korean Football Club.
Any good?
A volunteer can take any guys at all. I take photographs, you know, I welcome it, and I just concerned about, and I don't want to diverse into individual clubs, but there are some clubs within the Premiership that don't have a ground. And that would be a concern of mine, that they could get lost in the mix of ground improvements, that we leave nothing aside for those clubs in Northern Ireland that actually need a home or need to go back to a home. I welcome it and I understand it. I just wish it was finalised and everybody knew what they were going to get and could get on with the work.
So those clubs are eligible to apply?
I know.
Okay.
Just raising a point.
Okay, thank you, Morris. Brian.
Thank you, Chair, and certainly I welcome that this Communities Minister has brought this sub-regional funding, study of funding forward, and as Daniel alluded to, it's been a long delay. It was needlessly delayed by previous ministers, and the 36.2 million sadly will deliver less today than it would have done 10 years ago, and that's for those who delayed it to answer to. But I understand the desire to make the funding stretch as far as possible and to seek matching contributions. I mean, councils do have access to capital funding from their own sources that privately owned clubs do not have, and you've explained how there's a model that's followed by Sport NI and IFA in that regard. Can I ask, in the application process, are the applicants required to have that funding immediately in place, or what is this time scale for securing the match funding?
Must have it in place by the time that their construction project goes into the construction phase. So again, it's this recognition that many other funders will not be willing to provide match funding, partnership funding, often referred to in both ways, until planning permission is in place. Most capital grant funding schemes require projects to have full planning permission. We didn't require applicants to this scheme to have planning permission. You can apply for a project at any state of readiness, and then we'll work with those projects to take them through design and planning, and that will give them the opportunity to spend that time also raising the other income that they need to provide their partnership funding.
So there's likely to be, when decisions are made, it's likely to be there won't be final letters of offer. There'll be conditional, and there'll be processes that
Absolutely.
Applicants will have to go through. And remind me, what is the time scale for the spending of the funding then? Has one been set?
No, and deliberately so, because the expectation is that we will select a first cohort of projects to be taken forward from the applicants, the applications that we receive, and then those projects will move forward based on their own state of readiness. So we'll not hold one project back while another achieves planning permission, for instance. Now, that gives projects time to achieve their partnership funding, but we are requiring within the application that applicants who don't have partnership funding secured set out how they propose to go about it, so that we can consider whether that's a convincing argument or whether they just say they're going to raise partnership funding. We need to have some assurance that it is likely to materialise, so that obviously we're not taking projects through that design and planning phase that are unlikely to be able to proceed at construction phase because of a lack of finance.
But applicants are being given time to get planning
Absolutely.
approval and to secure
Yes.
match funding, you know, and all other matters.
They would be
which are
funded
required.
through that stage for design and planning at 100% grant funding rate from the department.
And at this stage, is there any? There certainly will be desire to increase the pot, but is there any indication at this stage? And I suppose it'll be interesting to see the scale of applicants, you know, and the total requests coming in. Is there any potential at this stage for increasing the pot?
I think Minister has been very clear in his public statements that this is the first phase of the programme, and he will seek, as budget becomes available, to secure what he can with executive colleagues to continue the TNIF programme.
Okay.
About 40 eligible applicants, we expect them all to apply.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Brian. Melissa, Lana Island Hall.
Fáilte Rove, Shaharish. You're very welcome back here now again. Agus we has behind the righteous fast, and thank you for your statement to date as well. But I noticed that central in that too, the presentation, is the very fact that you emphasised words such as transparency and equality, and in terms of being major objectives within the actual funding. And like the other representatives here from the Northwest, we're only but too well aware of the importance of clubs, especially small clubs, especially those maybe that have grown from little acorns as well to much bigger clubs. A very, very sort of appropriate definition for Derry being the city of acorns in many respects, but also a city of soccer. And they're being adversely affected in every respect by the requirements, we'll say, within this funding at the present time, especially the 40%. And I would actually would hope that would be reconsidered. And I don't think that it's appropriate just to sort of view or to refer to, we'll say, the standards within other organisations now that exist at the present time, where 40% has been established by them, we'll say, as a criteria. That is not necessarily just a good enough reason in itself, that where it would end up then depriving, in particular, as I say, so many of the smaller clubs in that as well, who take advantage of, or rather not even advantage, but having to use council facilities purely because of the very fact that they are a smaller unit in the very first instance. But then, in the event of them being successful and continuing to use council facility, where there's other requirements on their behalf, even to perform, we'll say, within higher standard leagues and so on, once again they find that now, as council will be deprived of this funding, it actually puts them at a major disadvantage as well. And I know, in particular, too, I referred to the Derry City and Stavan Council that to date have always depended on the likes of the rate support grant and so on, that again has almost vanished in terms of what it is that's going to the council there. So it's putting that additional pressure on councils representing communities, and in particular these smaller units then that are in many ways sort of the lifeblood of many communities throughout the north of Ireland in so many respects. So I would seriously ask you to consider to review that requirement.
I think it is really important to reiterate the requirement upon us as officials that the department must be a funder of last resort, and that we're unable to fund any costs which are affordable for an applicant to fund themselves, and that's for all applicants, not just local government. So it may be very possible that even club applicants are eventually required to provide partnership funding at 40% or more as well, if we deem that affordable. So applicants are being asked in their application to set out how they will provide the minimum level of partnership funding that we have required as a basic eligibility requirement. We're also providing points for applicants who can provide above the minimum level of partnership funding. But when we take projects forward for support, we will also subject them to a due diligence exercise to consider affordability. And if we deem that applicants can afford to pay more, and that the department's position as funder of last resort would require our contribution to be less than they have proposed, we're going to have to look at that in the context of business case approvals.
And in the same context then, in the event of them not being able to provide additional funding, Are they dropped out of the scheme then?
If they're not able to provide the minimum level of partnership funding, then we wouldn't score their applications.
Okay, thank you. Kelly?
Thanks very much. You mentioned earlier that the chief executives of the councils were involved in the
Chief Leisure Officers
Chief Leisure
Association.
Officers. They were all involved. I'm just thinking when they were planning for the rate setting scheme for the next financial year, they would have had notification of that then, that the 40%, and been able to feed that into the rate setting process.
I'm not sure about the timescales on that. I couldn't comment.
We can maybe check that just to make sure, because for those councils that are struggling with it, it would be just good to know if they've tied up all their own dots internally. I don't know if they've applied, but Newton Ards obviously doesn't have a ground, and that it's going to be one of the more expensive ones to secure. Something like Newton Ards that's currently playing out of Clandyboy and doesn't have their own home pitch, do they have to have planning permission or outline planning permission, or purchase the ground first?
No.
So the time length on this is fairly decent for that.
They would need to have the planning permission, have and be moving towards purchase of the ground or securing a long lease by the time they got to construction stage for the project.
It's good that there's a bit of time for that one. The other thing I wanted to ask is, obviously the process is ongoing at the moment. Thank goodness we've finally got it rolling out. There has been a lot of clubs waiting a long time for this. But I'm very aware that in waiting a long time for this, there have been clubs that have issues with repairs and maintenance that have been building up over a period of time. And I'm just wondering, as an outcome and a learning from this process, while this process is a chance for clubs to make significant improvements, I'm thinking about the long term, learning from what we know now. I know I have a colleague, David Honeyford, who talks about a rolling programme of support for clubs so that they can dip into something they know. For instance, this year they can go for improved drainage. Next year maybe they can go for lights. The year after that they can try something else. Are there any thoughts out of this that there will be a rolling programme that will support those clubs so that they don't have to wait for a big pot to come up, and that we can keep the standards and the safety improved in the long term?
I've spoken to David about this. So, obviously we're in a constrained single-year budget position at the minute, and that really prohibits the rolling programme David talks about, and I completely get where he's coming from. Now, Sport NI obviously operate a number of programmes around health and safety, and we look to secure additional funding for sport on an ongoing basis. I think it's a great proposition, but we really need to move ourselves out of this single-year budget position before we could commit to future years' funding in that way.
Because when I think about clubs like Saintfield in my area, they have such fantastic plans moving forward, and they sort of have to wait until...
and at the risk of moving away from football, obviously not just football, it's across the piece for sport. And we do have, there's schemes that open on a rolling basis by Sport NI, which people can tap into.
It's probably important to say as well, just in relation to TNIF, that one of the clear aims of this programme is to create grounds which are sustainable. So one of the requirements when we get to business stage, business case stage with projects will be multi-year operational plans. We will want to see how clubs are actually able to manage ongoing maintenance requirements based on additional income that we would expect them to be able to generate from having had a major capital investment. So that there shouldn't be a requirement to have to keep coming back to the public purse for maintenance costs. The idea is that they create facilities now which can give them the income that they need. I'm looking at Willie in case there's anything else I need to say on that, but that's our expectation, that should be possible.
Yeah, part of the programme and the objectives was actually looking at that sustainability piece. And part of when we look at the grounds is actually hopefully with improved grounds, you get a larger, more diverse spectator base. And it's that fan and spectator experience that we're looking to capture once the grounds are finished, and hopefully with that then increase revenue, and that leads to stronger sustainability for the grounds and the clubs in the future.
I know I have it locally with me with Portaferry that if they want to move up a league, they have to have improved facilities there, and it's quite frustrating because the council look at a ground and go, well, it's okay, but it doesn't actually fit what the the leagues require from a football club. But no, I think, to be honest, let's see how this goes. The application stage is still open. I hope that all that can apply do, which will make for a difficult time to work through all of those applications. I'm keen to see, as an outcome of the system, not only who gets the grants, obviously, but any interactions with councils. My concern would be that there are councils that have a number of teams who will be coming through and making applications, and are they picking out one club because the cost, or one area because they could actually be applying for a couple of different.
Maybe just to clarify this, the call that's open at the moment is for performance clubs only. So there are only around 40 eligible applicants, we think, based on league criteria. And so we don't expect a large number of applications from councils.
But there may be those councils that have 2 performance clubs.
I don't think there are any councils with 2 performance clubs in their council area.
Ards and North Down.
That would own the ground.
Where the council would own the ground.
Well, I suppose Ards doesn't have any ground yet. Yeah,
the focus, just to clarify, the focus is on owners of the ground, because obviously when we grant fund, we need to be able to place securities on those grounds. So we need to deal with the owner. So owner, as Emer set out in her opening statement, is either freehold interest in the ground or a long lease of at least 25 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Andy?
Can I just very quickly pick up on that point, securities on the ground?
Yeah.
To what extent will that be? So if a private club, for example, sold on and made a significant profit after public finance in their facilities, what would the stipulations in that regard be?
We'll place charges.
Okay. And then see, in terms of, obviously there's been extensive work over many years on sub-regional now, the football fund, and the then minister obviously at that time in 21 done the refresh and re-engagement piece. Is what we see now as a result of that engagement in 2021, or has there been were there further changes made between that period, and if so, what were those changes?
So the refresh and re-engagement work was again intensive stakeholder engagement process that involved surveying clubs and having one-to-one interviews with key stakeholders, including governing bodies and councils were talked to at that time as well. So yes, we have taken on board that in the policy proposals that we brought to our current minister. We also took on board the outworkings of the 2015 public consultation and feedback from stakeholders that's been more recently derived. So we have placed a very heavy reliance on stakeholder feedback in this process. We valued it really very much at all levels, right down to clubs themselves.
Yep. So if we sort of cast our minds back to before the Assembly went into it went down again, obviously we were all told that sub-regional was ready to go at that period. So what if any changes has been made to sub-regional that was ready to go to be signed off by the executive at that point to when it was signed off by the current minister in 2024?
I'm not sure that it was ready to be signed off
changes
at that stage, because we didn't have we've only had detailed proposals brought forward in the last 12 months.
So at the time, Andy, I think you're talking about whenever Minister Hargey was in post.
Mm-hmm.
So since then we have had the SGSA do assessments of all the performance grounds. So the proposals that we were looking at the time were done during COVID and were all based on desk research and engagement that way. Since then we've had full assessments of all the grounds, so they have been revised again. So at the time we were looking at, for example, would award caps work? But the evidence that's been gathered since then would show that we wouldn't drive value for money if we did that, because we needed to address the needs of the clubs. So it's been an iterative process. So the proposals just continue to be shaped as time moves on.
But there were no proposals ever approved by a minister prior to...
Okay, again, I may be mistaken, but from memory at that point, and Kelly, you were on the committee at that time as well, we were of the understanding that it was ready to go to the executive, but the minister couldn't take it to the executive. Can you recall that, Kelly?
No, to be honest, I think it was the location of the budget was one of the main issues, yeah.
Yeah, well, look, anyway, I'll move on. In terms of the score matrix that you've mentioned several times, well, is there any consideration going to be given to clubs who have not already received public finance up to this point?
No, that's not going to advantage them, having not received public finance in terms of the financial section of the application. It might advantage them in the need section of the application because their need may be greater and they may be able to set out a more compelling case for investment in their ground.
Okay, appreciate that. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Morris,
one quick one. Thanks very much for your presentations. And I know the second tranche coming out is for grassroots football, which Kelly has highlighted there, and maybe or clubs maybe and my area too. But have you had any discussions with the AFA in regards to the new pyramid structure?
Conference League.
And their restructuring of youth and ladies football?
So we are working very closely with the Irish FA, and yes, they briefed us on this. It's a matter for the IFA as the governing body to determine what the appropriate league structure is, so we wouldn't seek to influence that, but we take it into account when we're designing policy proposals for the Minister. But really our focus is on achieving value for money rather than seeking to be part of the discussions about how football should be delivered.
Yeah, it's not about delivery of football, it's about delivery of funding to enable clubs to step onto that pyramid rather than the pyramid itself.
So the approach that we've taken with the performance programme is to invite clubs to bring forward their proposals for their projects. I think we would likely be proposing to the Minister something very similar for grassroots, that clubs would say this is what we need, and they'd take account of their league requirements, their community of interest requirements, and they would make their proposals rather than us dictating what league requirements they maybe should be adhering to. That makes sense.
Sure. Thanks for your indulgence.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I have to say, absolutely welcome the fact that money's going into sport, and I think that's always a good thing, and particularly that grassroots level, I think will be really good. It does strike me that it does underpin the need to see casement being progressed and for the work taken actively on that issue as well. But I suppose, given this programme that we're talking about today, you have indicated, I hope that you will engage actively to ensure that the benefits of this particular scheme can be felt right across. So I would be keen that you would engage where those concerns are. I'm also struck by the fact that the Minister is also the Minister for Local Government, so he also has a responsibility in terms of the Council. So it just would be great to see, to ensure that this can be delivered in a way which gives all areas a chance to benefit from it. So thank you for that, Emer and Catherine and all the rest of your team. Appreciate that today, and no doubt we'll be in touch again.
I think I'm back next week again, Chair, so we'll see you then. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Members, just a quick check before we move on if there's any follow-up actions there that anybody wants to suggest there. Are members content with that for now? Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So we're going now into LTM. Yeah. So, thanks, members. Moving on to agenda item 7, employment rights legislative consent motion.
Just before we go in this, can I declare an interest as a charity trustee and a member of a trade union?
Yep.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yep. Okay.
Can I just check, is anyone coming in for this, or is this just our own discussion? We've received these submissions. It wasn't clear, were we getting...
Yeah.
The purpose of having it on the agenda today is to note that, so that they can be included in the report.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
To note those contributions.
Yeah. And it is a very truncated time in all of this, which is one of the issues that we will be touching upon. So, members, starting at page 432 there, you have been provided with comments on the LCM from Unite the Union, the Equality Commission, IC2 and NIC-IC2. Do members have any comments or queries, or are you content to note and include copies of the replies in the committee report?
Great.
Yeah. Members, you've also been provided at page 442 with a response from the Committee for Finance, stating that it is content to note the application of the LCM with respect to the Department of Finance remit, and ask that its members be kept abreast of the progress of the LCM. Also attached is a copy of the Department of Finance briefing paper for members' information. So, do members have any comments or queries, or content to note at this point the copies? And I suppose just to say that LCMs can be something, I suppose, that generally cause some concern around, you know, the application of them when it comes to specifically local. And I know we received some assurances around the Gang Masters and Labour Abuse Authority and that continuing on. It will be important in the future that takes account of the fact that there are regions close to the border, so there will have to be, you know, jurisdictional issues there. I do note very strongly the comments of the unions, and I think we should be reflecting those and flagging those issues. But I'm wondering, do members have any other issues that they want to raise? Go ahead, Kelly.
I think we need a wee bit more detail on this Fair Work Agency and the division of duties between Northern Ireland devolved legislation and what they're actually going to be covering, because I am very concerned that Northern Ireland does have different equality legislation that is in place that isn't applicable across in England, Scotland and Wales. If we could just tease that out a little bit more at some stage. I know that the Fair Work Agency sounds, you know, like it's not going to cause too many difficulties, but we don't know what's coming down the road. I assume that because here has to give approval, we can ensure that there isn't a difficulty with any of our equality legislation being applied, especially to fair work and things like that. But I think we just need a wee bit more on that Fair Work Agency and how it's going to apply here.
Yeah, and I think there's also a valid question around what scope there is for the powers of the Fair Work Agency to be extended into devolved areas, and what protections there are to ensure that, and also indeed what scope there are for local trade unions here to be represented on the agency if it's based across the water. I think that's so.
Is there a question to go back to the Department for Economy? So the LCM is a matter. What we're being asked to consider is whether or not the committee is content for the LCM to consent to it. It's not scrutinising the aspects of the bill that's going through the Westminster scrutiny process.
Okay.
But can we place these concerns on the record in terms of the report?
We will track them in the report, yeah. The committee would welcome further information on it.
Yeah, and can we get more information on the scope of the Fair Work Agency?
Yeah.
I mean, it is clearly welcome that the statutory sick pay issue will be rolled out to workers in a more comprehensive way. I think that's to be welcomed, but it's just a question of how it develops, really, yes. And
impact that it'll have, yeah.
So,
and Chair, do we have the timescale then? I mean, there was 4 departments here last week, so. And they said it would be coming back to us at committee. Is that right? Will it just be paperwork coming back to us, or will there be a briefing coming back?
No. I'll try to piece that out here now, Brian. Right. So, understanding Order 42A, paragraph 7, bracket 7, which sets out 15 working days from the date of referral. The deadline for committee to consider and report on this LCM is Thursday, the 13th of March. So that's next week. Yeah. Therefore, the plan is that the committee team will complete drafting, incorporating this evidence, and set out the draft report on Monday. The draft report on Monday, seeking members' comments and amendments to be returned by email, so that any issues that are raised by members can then be included in a final draft, which we will need to review with a view to agreement at our next meeting on next Thursday. So that's the process by which we're seeking to attempt to include members' views in that regard. So the email will go out on Monday, members can respond, that will be compiled into the report, which we'll be then looking at on Thursday with a view to finalising them.
It's tight.
Yeah.
Okay. It's tight.
So it's tight, but can I get members' agreement that that's the way we'll manage it?
Okay.
So, yeah.
But I think it's worth noting as well, because I think the committee only got sight of this a number of weeks ago, didn't we? So has been very tight all together. But I understand and I appreciate the work that you've put into it. And yes, we'll get agreement on Thursday.
I think there does need to be efforts made to ensure that it's not coming in that tight. Important LCMs, you know, and they're all important in their own way, but complex enough areas that the time frame does allow.
I'd always have. I think the concern other members have about if a body here is operating under Westminster effectively and how that relates. I flagged up likes of the Labour Relations Agency, you know, which is under DFE, and I know DFE were here last week, but just how these different bodies relate to each other when one that isn't under a department here, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we could consider asking the Committee on Procedures to look at the 15-day limit in standing orders, which could potentially provide some additional time. That's a very tight turnaround, so would members be content we ask the Committee on Procedures to have a look at that?
Yeah.
Given the... Yep, thank
Make
you.
that part of the report.
Yeah.
There was a
Yeah,
previous recommendation, I think, in the procedures inquiry, because some Westminster bills take a year and some take a day, and to afford a bit more flexibility to the period of time that individual devolved committees could have to consider.
I think, just knowing from procedures, I think that there was it's on the list of things to do if procedures can get to it, that ministers, as soon as they know about an LCM, currently they can't just release that to the relevant committee. It was for a change so that could happen, which would give a little bit more time, but yeah, it was only one comment came through asking for that, so if the committee wanted to put something forward, it would be added onto the list for the review.
Okay.
Yeah. Members be content with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, members. Checking clerk, all okay with that? Yeah. So moving on then, members, agenda item 8, which is SR 2025/000, the Welfare Supplementary Payment Extension Regulations, NI 2025, page 453. So members, we considered the SL1 at our meeting on the 30th of January when we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule. Have members any objection to the rule? So therefore, can I ask formally that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/000, the Welfare Supplementary Payment Extension Regulations 2025, NI 2025, and recommends that it is affirmed by the Assembly. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 9 then, members, SR 2025/000, the Welfare Supplementary Payment Universal Credit Regulations, NI 2025, on page 464. So, members, we considered this SL1 at our meeting on the 30th of January when we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule. Do members have any objection to the rule? No. Therefore, can I ask that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/000, the Welfare Supplementary Payment Universal Credit Regulations, NI 2025, and recommends that it is affirmed by the Assembly. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Agenda item 10, SR 2025/000, the Welfare Supplementary Payment Universal Credit Social Sector Size Criteria Regulations, NI 2025, page 498. So members, we considered the SL1 at our meeting on the 30th of January when we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule. Do members have any objection to the rule? No. Thank you then. Can I ask that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/000, the Welfare Supplementary Payment Universal Credit Social Sector Size Criteria Regulations, NI 2025, and recommends that it is affirmed by the Assembly. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Can I just double check the numbering on those, because it seems a bit unusual that each of those SRs are SR 2025/000.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I asked that question myself. I think it stands out. They're not assigned a number because they're subject to the draft affirmative procedure.
Okay.
So until they're being brought forward, then they're
Then
assigned
they'll
the
get it.
number. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Kelly. Well, I think we're all wondering that, and so
The gate came out.
yeah. So, members, agenda item 11 then, SR 2025/36, the pneumoconiosis, etc., workers' compensation, payment of claims, amendment regulations, NI 2025, and these are at page 509. So we considered the SL1 at our meeting on 23rd of January 2025 when we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule. So do members have any objection to the rule? No. Therefore, can I ask that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/36, the pneumoconiosis, etc., workers' compensation, payment of claims, amendment regulations, NI 2025, and has no objection to the rule, subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are members content?
Agreed.
Content.
So We're moving on, members, to our next briefing. I might take a very quick comfort break there, just a 5-minute comfort break, and we'll be coming back to agenda item 12. Thank you.
Just ask now.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
That's she confirmed.
Okay, thank you, members. So we're back in session, and we're moving into agenda item 12, which is departmental briefing on the removal of intimidation points from the housing selection scheme. So a copy of the briefing paper is at your pack, members, at page 523. You've also been provided at page 137 of table papers with papers from QUB, Queen's University, on the impact of intimidation on the work of registered housing associations and the allocation of housing. So we now welcome the following officials to the meeting today. So we have Heloise Brown, who is Acting Director of Social Housing Policy and Oversight, and Ciara Lynch, Head of Social Housing Policy. So you're both very welcome to a meeting today and appreciate you attending. And could I ask Heloise for you to make a brief opening statement, and then we'll move to questions from members. Thank you.
Certainly. I'll run through it and keep it as brief as I can. So this is following from the Minister's oral statement on the 28th of January. We have given you a bit of background in the briefing about the fundamental review of allocations, which has been going on for a number of years, to look at a review of how the housing selection scheme allocates homes with the aim of making the process fairer and more transparent for applicants. So there was a public consultation in 2017 that looked at 20 proposals for change. And when the outcome report for the consultation was published in 2020, the Housing Executive was asked to do further work on intimidation points on the basis that people in danger in their own home need prioritisation, including victims of domestic abuse. So the Housing Executive has commissioned independent research to inform the future of intimidation points through a range of options. It provided the Department with a recommendation, which the Minister agreed, and that was subject to the announcement on the 28th of January that intimidation points in the form of Rule 23 of the housing selection scheme will be removed, so the allocation of 200 points will cease. So going forward, the points for violence or threat of violence within the scheme will not exclude any victims of violence, abuse or trauma. Regardless of causation, victims will be assessed using the same criteria within the housing selection scheme. In terms of the planned timescale, the Housing Executive is expecting to remove Rule 23 by the 31st of March, the end of this financial year. It has confirmed and the Minister's agreed there'll be transitional protection in place. So where applicants already have 200 points awarded under Rule 23, they will retain those points either until they're rehoused or until they refuse two reasonable offers of accommodation as per the scheme. Applicants who have alleged intimidation and whose circumstances are being considered under Rule 23 prior to its removal will be investigated in line with the existing policies and procedures. So where their circumstances meet the Rule 23 criteria, they will be awarded 200 points. So those can be awarded after the 31st of March, providing the investigation has commenced before the 31st of March. The independent research also identified a need for increased recognition of victims of violence, abuse and trauma, and this formed part of the Housing Executive's recommended option. So the Minister has agreed the recommendation for a review of primary social needs criteria and the appropriate level of points. He's asked the Housing Executive to take forward the work to review primary social needs criteria and points for all victims of violence, abuse and trauma as soon as possible, and to engage with stakeholders to inform what the prospective changes will look like. So this will be part of the ongoing review, the wider review of fundamental review of allocations, and it's expected to complete at the moment by September 2026. We received the committee's query regarding the loss of a form of monitoring information, in particular in relation to paramilitary activity with the removal of Rule 23, and we've given you a bit of information in the briefing to show the numbers that have accepted as homeless due to intimidation compared with other reasons related to violence. The Housing Executive currently gather this data as part of the homelessness assessment process. And for intimidation, they are only counting intimidation against the types of causation that appear in Rule 23. So the award of intimidation points and the reporting on it as part of those official statistics was never intended to be a monitoring tool. There are other organisations that gather data on intimidation for broader monitoring purposes. So the Housing Executive will consider in due course what information it needs to collect, including whether to continue the current approach or to change it as part of the review of primary social needs points. So that is a brief outline of where we are with this at the minute. I'm happy to hear your questions.
Okay, thank you for that. And I suppose one of my principal concerns I'm picking up is around the implementation and the impact of it when it hits the ground. So the Minister made the announcement, I think toward the end of January, and is coming in on the 31st of March. Do you think is that long enough period of time, and what concerns are you picking up from the sector and how are you addressing those?
I think we would have been concerned if it was a very long period of time, because that would have been a long period of time for people to be uncertain about what was happening with the scheme. So it was certainly preferable for the department that a date was agreed that was a little bit sooner rather than later, but gave the Housing Executive time to plan and time to look at what it would need and to gather stakeholder advice as well before that change comes into place and before it starts to look at the review of primary social needs points. We would deem that to be an adequate amount of time given the need to remove points and the risk, I suppose, of people perceiving that those points won't be available after a certain date.
And are you satisfied that it has been enough time now and that the sector are prepared for it and that there will be a smooth transition through to the new system?
Certainly, yes. And the Housing Executive has a stakeholder advisory group that it has managed throughout the fundamental review, and that's made up of a number of stakeholders from the voluntary and community sector as well as housing associations. So they're engaging with them through that. They are communicating very clearly with stakeholders when stages are implemented. So we would be satisfied that that's adequate time, certainly, to make that change.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to members now, so go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you very much. To be honest, we needed to tear the plaster off, and we've done that now, so the intimidation points will no longer be allocated unless you have an existing investigation. So the people who currently have those points who are in temporary accommodation, who haven't yet been allocated a house or turned down two offers, I'm a little concerned about the skewing of the housing allocations then, because you could have someone who presents as domestic violence victim, for instance, who will be awarded points under the primary social needs criteria for the next period of time, but who will not come close to the amount of points that someone who has been intimidated would have. I'm quite keen that there is a review of how many points somebody needs to be able to live in an area, because at the moment nobody's getting a house in my area unless they have intimidation points. 160 is normal, and the pressure, as we know, on housing. I'm just wondering, how's that going to be dealt with until the situation is reviewed, and moving forward, the breakdown of primary social needs. I noticed in page 4 of your document, which is page 525 for ourselves, the breakdown, for instance, of the homeless households says domestic violence, intimidation, bomb, fire damage, and then neighbourhood harassment. I imagine under the neighbourhood harassment that would give, there would be a lot of detail in that. Domestic violence survivors, it'll be incidents of race, hate, sexual orientation attacks. I take it that there will be more requirement to detail those as a breakdown of the headings that are in the primary social needs criteria.
Will partly depend on what the housing executive come back with, because the difficulty that intimidation points always presented was that element of causation. So you had to look at, is it one of these criteria that has caused this attack? So the housing executive will look, and because these date from stem from the homelessness decisions, the decisions on whether violence, for example, has been a reason for the homelessness decision, and then they have looked at how that interacts with the points awarded in the selection scheme. So it will depend very much on what happens with those primary social need points and whether they're split or added to, or a new one is created, and how that's defined. And the cap on the points is another area that they're looking at as well. So it is a bit early to say, but they will certainly be very mindful of the need to understand exactly what's behind the statistics that are coming through for violence, because it is useful data. And when, I appreciate there's been a lot of interest in the fact that that data has been collected, and it will stop in that form because the housing executive will not be investigating the same things. But that data is also useful because it does tell us important trends like domestic abuse and the levels of neighbourhood harassment as well. It is important data to have there.
Just then, from the 31st of March, obviously within the intimidation points, unless there's a specific police investigation ongoing, there's, as we say there, 226 people have intimidation points. Do we know how many of them are still on the books as requiring a house? And just that issue that I have with the number of points that you require for an area is just out of reach for so many.
And that every stage of the review so far has had some element of transitional protection if something's been removed. So, for example, removing the reasonable offers from 3 down to 2, we made, the housing executive made sure that everyone, if they still had one remaining offer, still had it, even though the total number. So there has been transitional protection for every change. So this is the same, really. People have met that threshold and been awarded those points in their application, and it would be a very harsh thing and potentially a challengeable thing to say that they're being taken away once they've been awarded or once they've been investigated. And that's the 2 elements of the protection that the housing executive were keen to include in the scheme. I mean, the other side of that is then that from the 1st of April, there won't be any new awards. So that will begin to level the list. And I appreciate the need is everywhere at the moment, and it's really high. But it will start to flatten the list in a sense, because that really high award won't be there. And I think what has been difficult was the level of points that intimidation was set at, because 200 is very, very high compared to the other points available in the scheme. So it will flatten slightly, and there are other changes within the fundamental review, which again we're happy to come back and talk about at any time, but that will move it more towards time on list as well, and that should help to address people who have an established level of need and have been at that need for a really long period of time but haven't quite got to that next level of having the highest points. Yeah. And the housing executive, again, it's going to be a really complex change and a really fundamental one, and in terms of how it affects people's priority order, and the housing executive are doing quite a bit of work on that to start to address the fact that people have been on the list a very long time, and you balance that against sort of fine points differences in some circumstances.
And finally, just Chair, I appreciate the housing executive are working on this, but will it require any legislation through the Assembly in order to amend primary social needs, or is that all done through regulation?
It's all through. It's a statutory scheme, but it's submitted to the department, and the minister can approve it, and then it's published. The only legislative impact that we've identified is emergency grant.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly. Brian.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly, I welcome the move by the Minister and any conversations I've had on this matter with people, people have welcomed it as well. People feel there was an unbalanced approach, and unfortunately what was a well-meaning policy was open to abuse, and people felt that it was being abused, and it was seen as a way even to bring about a concentration of people in certain areas. So I would do welcome that the Minister moved on this. In terms of provision, setting aside the review of the points, in terms of provision for people who are genuinely facing intimidation, in need of emergency accommodation, can you assure us that they are being given priority if in an immediate circumstance where people need to move if they're under threat of serious violence?
Yeah, certainly. That does continue. The Housing Executive operates an out-of-hours service which will always operate for victims of violence and abuse who need to leave quickly. It is open to anyone presenting as homeless out of hours. Obviously it responds in working hours as well. Where people have to leave their home immediately, it can make temporary accommodation available, and that's the cause of some of the non-standard temporary accommodation that we're talking about in terms of the cost of that at the moment. So that it absolutely does respond through the homelessness legislation, separate from the selection scheme, and I think that's where there's a sort of fine distinction between the prioritisation of people for an allocation of a home and the emergency response to make sure that they're safe, they're taken out of the situation, and they're given an option to be put to a place of safety.
Okay, and in the outworkings of this change is those people are likely to be in temporary accommodation for longer until they will be allocated a permanent if they're going back into a social housing. So how does that affect your provision? So they're not going to be getting the 200 points going forward. But will there be an assessment of need? How will people in genuine need be provided for?
I should say as well, and the Housing Executive will say that most of the temporary accommodation is own front door. So at the point that people get into it, it's not shared accommodation or hotel and B&B for long periods of time. But certainly everyone, whatever their need for temporary accommodation, is entitled to it if they're homeless under the legislation, and that will include victims of intimidation. There's an element of, and there's one of the other proposals within the fundamental review around points regarding interim accommodation. At present within the scheme there are points once somebody spent 6 months in interim accommodation, as that was one of the other ones that the department committed to look at further with the Housing Executive, because there is an element of meeting a person's immediate need, and there's also an element of how you prioritise them then for an allocation, and again those are two slightly different things. There's a lot of need across all of the housing categories as well as the community safety category. Yes, and I think the 2017 consultation was trying to make the point that actually people certainly have a physical safety need, which is paramount, but when you look at people who have points purely on housing need, they will never get to the level of points that people with intimidation points have. So the expectation would be in levelling that playing field a bit more, that there is a bit more focus on people living in poor housing rather than people who need to move for safety reasons. There was a balance of those, and I think at the minute there was a risk.
But that, anyway, people in an emergency situation under threat will be provided for.
Yes.
And I just want to ask, Chair, finally about the wider review. It talks here about the 20 proposals, 9 have been implemented. And when it talks about September 2026, does that just relate to the primary social needs criteria element of the points system, or is that the entire? Is the aim to complete the entire review by September 2026 or October 2026, whichever it is?
Anticipated, so yes.
For all 20?
Ideally. Right. Now obviously there's been some pushback in terms of the work that's been going on around this proposal being moved slightly forward. But the Housing Executive are working on that, and they have a project plan in place. And as Eloise had mentioned, they're working with stakeholders and hoping that all of those proposals will come together by September 2026.
But there might be individual changes made along the way then, the way these intimidation points have been removed. I mean, it talks about stages 1 and 2. Yeah. So effectively, is the point system changing at a number of stages, or will it all happen in one go?
It should happen in the stage process. Intimidation points, Minister had decided to take some action there in terms of bringing it forward. Once he had received the information and the recommendation, he wanted to take action, felt he couldn't wait any longer. So we moved that forward. The Housing Executive helped bring that forward a little bit. It was due to be implemented in stage 4 with other proposals relating to points. So there's stages 3 and 4 still to happen. And we're working on those in that order. So these will all come together then in stage 3, which should be underway. And then stage 4, hopefully by the end of 2026. I mean, it is subject to a little bit of change, but ideally that's where the Housing Executive is working towards in terms of their implementation.
Well, could I request through the Chair, could we receive the current, or from the start of April, I presume, the current points system? I mean, I have a useful document from Housing Rights, which other members may have, to let people see, look, here's the details of the point system, look up and down this list, and just to make sure we're using the correct up-to-date version. If we can get that in our pack, it'd be useful to have.
At the end of every stage, and as rules are changed and approved by the department, then the rules change and then they're republished. So we can certainly bring you what we have at the moment. And then as they come along, and as Eloise said, there's a number of changes happening. You may wish for us to come back and talk about some of those as well.
Okay.
And just as a follow-up to that, what communications are taking place with applicants to ensure that they're up to date with the situation? How are you managing that?
The Housing Executive are all over that in terms of the forums that they have and the communication that they have. They have an online platform and have regular conversations with their tenants. And as changes happen, let's communicate it online and also through leaflets and letters as necessary, but ongoing for that, when we're involved very much in stakeholder advisory groups and making sure that representative groups have their say in how the implementation approaches, let alone the changes that will happen at each stage. And then they go through a process of being approved by the Housing Executive's Project Board, and then it comes to us as a department and the Minister to approve any rule changes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm coming to our Deputy Chair, Nicola Brogan. Go ahead, Nicola.
Chair, and thank you, Eloise and Ciara. It was a really informative briefing there. The Chair has actually just asked me a question about how you're communicating with those on the social housing applicants at the minute and those on the waiting list, because as has already been said earlier, this is all coming very quickly. The decision was made at the end of January. It's going to be implemented now and at the end of this year month, so I suppose there wasn't much time, so I'm glad to hear that the Executive, as the Housing Executive, are working to let applicants know about it. The other thing I wanted to ask about was the level of engagement the department have had with stakeholders in bringing this here forward. So I know back in 2017 there was a consultation that was held, and I think 66% of the respondents to that question did agree with intimidation points being removed. But is that the last type of engagement you've had with stakeholders in that regard, or has that been ongoing since? And what have the responses been like since then?
I haven't had another formal public consultation. However, there was in 2020 then an outcome report published around expectations, and we'd worked very closely with the Housing Executive around that, about laying out plans and laying out these stages that we mentioned earlier. We ourselves haven't been involved in much, to be fair, external conversations.
I suppose it was handed over to the Housing Executive in 2020 once the outcome report was agreed. It was handed to the Housing Executive and they set up that stakeholder advisory group. So that would include a lot of those representative organisations like Housing Rights,
yes.
Who would input.
Are they in agreement with this though, and to your knowledge?
Yes, we attend, and I certainly attend all the stakeholder advisory groups, and they're very much given an opportunity. The Housing Executive have really managed it extremely well, and there's a robust process there, and they get papers, and then they can see that you can see the stakeholders' fingerprints, if you like, over it.
Yes.
So I'm content that that's been a really robust process.
I think that's important, and I do think that their communication piece with those on the waiting list or applying for social housing is really, really important as well, so they know what's going on, because these changes, they're big changes and they're happening quickly, so I do think that's important. But thank you for your briefing, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Morris.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'll be brief. You'll be pleased to hear. Intimidation points, I'm glad to see the back end of them, but there's evidence that paramilitary groups used intimidation as a means of control within their communities via the allocations process. Once they've gone, will the department be monitoring other criteria to see if there's a trend whereby another criteria is used to replace the intimidation points to control communities. That's a worry of mine, because the amount of people that we try to get houses, and all of a sudden somebody appears with intimidation points, and they're back down to the bottom of the list again.
I mean, it will very much depend, I think, on what that new primary social needs criteria looks like, and how that's worded in terms of the recognition of victims of abuse. But it is much broader, and I think that will be the difference. It will not look at the cause of the violence.
I know certainly that us in our department and within housing itself and the housing executive are very much involved with other organisations, paramilitary task force, for example, and we sit on groups like the Community Safety Network, and we're involved at that kind of a level, and there is an interaction with the police and others. But in terms of monitoring intimidation points as they currently are, as Eloise has mentioned kind of earlier on, it was very much at that kind of a niche cohort that they were looking at there, and hopefully moving forward in the removal of intimidation points removes that to a certain extent. And I don't mean to be naive in saying that, but in terms of that, but it doesn't mean necessarily then that there will be no continuation of review. How that's going to happen among with the housing executive, I mean they're statutorily obliged, and they'll keep records in terms of what they have to do to place those seeking or presenting as homeless. So that will continue to a certain extent. What that looks like right now, I can't say. But the housing executive will be working on that to make sure. So it's not going away 100%, but there certainly are other groups out there that are looking at the broader paramilitary within our communities, and that won't cease.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, Andy.
Sure. With your indulgence, can I go slightly broader than the intimidation points? You'd mentioned stage 3 is currently being taken forward with the intimidation points. Can you remind us what other fundamental review aspects are being taken forward as part of stage 3?
Sure, stage 3 is proposals 2 and 3. Sorry, it's a wee bit like a housing bingo when I say it like that, but bear with me when I get the words. They are legislative change regarding ASB, proposals 2 and 3, and also proposal 19, which is bringing the housing executive in line with PPANI, public protection agreements and arrangements, and they're working through steadily. The department, we have the lead in terms of the legislative changes that are going to be happening. We're working very closely with the housing executive about rule changes there and legislative changes that are going to happen there. And we are hoping that those 2 proposals will marry up with other proposals that the department's working with DOJ on, 2 other around injunctions, keep me right, and orders for possession. And we're hopefully going to group those together, and they'll be coming towards, I would like to think, in a bill to be introduced ideally by the summer.
Is there any work being done on the point in which the housing executive can assess homelessness? Because I know that creates a significant amount of anxiety for households that they have to wait to that 28-day point. I know that in some instances they do gather the information at the front end, but actually not being able to take it forward till the 28-day point is obviously causing a lot of anxiety.
It is something that's getting very close attention given the cost of temporary accommodation at the moment, so it is something the department's actively looking at. Whether there would be time for legislation in this mandate, I think, is still to be determined, really.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
I have to say that's a bit of a like we had no idea that was being planned, and there is clearly other significant legislation coming forward. We don't have the full legislative programme yet, but so just on the primary social needs review, what is it in general that you're hoping to achieve from that, and what are the terms of reference for that review?
The housing executive will work on the terms of reference for it. I don't know if they have a specific terms of reference, because they will have the ask of what the minister agreed, which was to look at increasingly the different categories of points, potentially splitting some of the categories or adding new ones, and looking at the cap. And they will model then, in terms of the types of applicants, the number of applicants on the list with those kind of points, what that will do in terms of priorities once you were to add another category of points and once you were to change the level of the cap. And there will then be a definition to be put around it in terms of if there was a new or split out category, in terms of how that will recognise the impact of violence on an individual.
The real purpose of it is to make sure that there's full recognition for everyone, and that there had been, until the decision to remove intimidation points, there had seemed to be that disparity with the 200 points, and then, as you've referenced earlier on, in terms of those who, for example, don't get intimidation points in the full 200. So the idea behind this was, we're making this decision, we're going to try to level the playing field, but let's look at what's currently in there, and how can we modernise it and think about today's society, and how can we fully recognise anyone in those sort of situations. So that's, broadly speaking, the the intention, and then after that the housing executive will come back to the department in terms of what their findings are, with a view to have a more modern approach to that, and a fairer, if I can say that, approach.
Okay. And it will be useful, I think, to see those terms of reference at the earliest possible point, just so that if you could flag that up. So I suppose we can leave it there. We'll pick up on some follow-up actions. I do want to say, I suppose I get a wee bit of a sense of a mismatch between the sector and their preparedness for it and what you have said today. So what I suppose I would say is I would urge you just to redouble your efforts in that regard and ensure that all of those who will be charged with dealing with these changes are in a position to understand what they are, how they're being communicated, the impact of them and that. So I suppose would urge that. Okay, listen, I think we can let you go with that. We'll pick up on any further actions following that. But thank you for today, and good luck with your work in the future.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
All the best. So, members, I think we're should maybe seek a full update from the department around that primary and secondary legislation, because obviously that's just a bill there being mentioned that's coming towards us, and we know we've already a very full schedule. So, members content that we seek a full. Again, we have already sought it, but we haven't received it. But members content we follow that up.
Legislative programme.
Legislative programme. We need that as a matter of urgency to plan.
Including secondary,
including
delegated.
Yeah. Primary and delegated. Yeah. And
could I also ask, Chair, if we could write to the housing executive, because they're developing this, they're reviewing and developing, that when they are doing the review of the housing selection scheme, it's that point about the sharing of the data, that there needs to be a breakdown of the allocation of primary social needs of how many people, and consideration of how they're going to present the data if someone has two or more allocations of awards under primary social needs, so we're not duplicating counting the same person more than once.
Or missing anyone. Either.
Yeah, exactly. And also, will they be communicating with the committee with regards to the review of those primary social needs? Because I'm quite concerned, for instance, someone who's been trafficked isn't listed in that, but there may well be a discussion that we need to have with the housing executive as to their thoughts.
And equally, Chair, I don't know if other members see it, the disparity in the evidence required, depending on what one advisor wants, another advisor may not accept the same. So that needs to be standardised insofar as it can be.
Are we asking for the housing executive to come in to discuss this, or are we asking them for the terms of reference and the work ongoing?
I'm very aware of our timescales, so if we have them coming in, we could ask them to do this, but or otherwise
not scheduled at the minute because they were in recently.
Yeah, so get it in writing at this point.
I think for now, yeah. And you've got Andy's point there as well in terms of the importance of that. Andy, just reiterate that, please.
It's just in relation to the standardisation of evidence, because I know there's a lot of weight placed around, for example, GP letters, and we all know the challenges individuals have in getting GP letters, etc.
Yeah.
And then obviously some advisors may accept one type of evidence and other advisors don't.
To ask if that's been included in the review?
I think they need to look at how wide they can go in terms of the evidence that individuals can provide, so that there's no undue burden placed on them, because obviously quite often individuals are in a situation where they're under a lot of pressure, they're under anxiety, and sometimes it's difficult to get the evidence that may be being requested.
The standardisation of the evidence going forward and what will be accepted
A clear understanding of what the evidence is, so they're listed in so far as what individuals need to provide.
Okay.
Members content? Clerk, you're content? Yep. Okay, thanks for that, members. That's very useful. So I'll move on then to agenda item 13, which is a briefing by the Boom Hall Trust. So a copy of the briefing papers at page 529 and further table papers at page 167. And members have also been given a hard copy there of a document from the Trust as well. So I'd now like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So Mr. Bart O'Donnell, who's trustee in Boom Hall Trust, Karen Latimer, Pauline Ross and Patrick Craig. So, Bart, I'll go back to yourself maybe. If you make a brief opening statement, then we'll get the members' questions. So go ahead, please.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting us. We're Boomhall Trust. I'd like to say hello to all the members, and I'd just like to explain basically, I don't know if any of you have seen our videos or our presentations. You're all very busy, you mightn't have had a chance to look at it. But basically, Boomhall Trust is a charity that has been set up to restore 60 acres of prime land on the river at the River Foyle, beside the Foyle Bridge. It's been derelict and unused pretty much for 55 years, and our mission is to bring that piece of land into public use for public benefit. And as a charity, we're going to acquire the money that perhaps the council doesn't have in its own resources to do. We're going to harness the community to bring that house into good community use. All the trustees here, I should first of all should introduce is Pauline Ross, who was involved in developing the Playhouse in Derry. This is Patrick Craig, former director of the Woodland Trust, who's involved for the last 20 years in doing landscape projects around the city and environs. And this is Karen Latimer, who's the former chair of Hearth, and they were involved, they're a restoration organisation that restored the stables at Sion Mills. So everyone here has had a history of regeneration projects, and our board, we have a handout there which you can see the pedigree of our board there of international significance. I'll not go through them all now, but on our board we have people who've been involved in regeneration projects. James Simpson, just to mention one, has been involved with consultation on the Great Wall of China, the Golden Temple of Amritsar. These are people of international significance who have done these projects before, and we're bringing that expertise, and it has been giving pro bono fairly much over the last number of years to try and develop this community project. Now, just to explain the Boomhall Trust, we have two principles. The first two are, the principles are, first of all, we are in the business of conserving this social asset. This is an extremely important site, which I'll explain in a minute. But our business is to, first of all, to take those resources that are deteriorating and put them back into good use to restore them. And number two, we insist that whatever we're doing is for public benefit. This is for community use. We are not restoring a house as a museum for people to come and look at and, don't touch the china. This is a house and a stables and a landscape that's going to be used on a daily basis by the people who live in the city and from beyond as well. So those are the two principles we have. Whatever we do, it has to conserve that asset, improve it, and secondly, it has to be done for community benefit. And in doing that, we haven't decided for ourselves what community benefit is. It's a key principle of ours that we scope what we're doing and we consult with the people who are going to have to use it. So our first mission was to go to the council who own that 60 acres and ask them what they felt they wanted. And very clearly the three headings which you see there are well-being, environmental and bringing people together. Now those are common themes that nearly all organisations are after these days. But in other words, we started from what the people said that they wanted. And those council policies came from years of consultation that they had with the One Plan and all sorts of things. So these are derived from what the people of the city have said that they've wanted. And so those are the three uses, and we've got 18 community collaboration partners who are going to carry out these programs. In other words, it's going to be used by the people who do these things, the community groups who've got the background, the expertise and the knowledge and the funding to carry out programs. They will use the site. As Boomhall Trust, we are curators of that site as we see it. Our job is to make it happen, is to bring those assets back into use, to restore them properly, and to encourage people to come and use them for those uses. So we're curators. And in the collaborators that we have would be a lot of them in the city, but we have them from all across the UK and Ireland to cover areas like addiction, mental health and well-being, all of the issues that are pressing in people's everyday needs. So the idea is that our collaborators will use these facilities once they're up and running, and that's where it will be able to wash its face. So we see ourselves very, very much as people who are trying to match what we can do, restoring all of this and making it available to what people really need. And what really encouraged us was that our community organisations got together a few years ago and they surveyed the people of the city, and the community groups did the survey, and they came back with a resounding and unanimous 98% of the people in the Northwest have said that they want this place restored and put into good public use. So that's where we are. Now, let me explain why this is so important, why this site is so important. The Boom Hall 60 acres estate is not a field like anywhere else. This is a very special place because something very important happened here 335 years ago. This is when those of you that know your history will know that during the siege of Derry, there was a boom put across the river to prevent the Williamite force relieving the city of Derry. And Boom Hall, which is why the name is Boom Hall, is the place where this happened, where the Williamite forces broke the boom across the Foyle. Now, the important thing about this is that this was a most significant historical development, because from that point forward, Parliament was sovereign. King James's army, backed by Louis XIV, the biggest despot Europe had ever known, the most powerful army in Europe, were stopped at the city of Derry. And from that point forward, James was in retreat, and he stopped in the Battle of the Boyne on the way down and had another wee skirmish, but that was the small battle. The really big one was the one in Derry, where the boom was broken, because from that point forward, James was never going to get to Scotland to get his other army to go down to throw out William and Mary. So the point I'm making is, we're all in this room in a parliament today. And the power that you have as parliamentarians came from that event, because this was the point of no return. That is a very significant thing that everybody can appreciate. And what I love is that everybody in the city, in Derry, is unanimous in saying we need to discuss this and have it that people can learn from this and come down to this place. So this was a very, very important place. The other important factor about Boom Hall was that during the siege of Derry, during the famine, the Alexanders who owned Boom Hall sold the house for famine relief. Now, that's a story you never hear. So the point is that this was a place that has always been involved with the people and has got a wonderful story to tell. It's also the home of the first American consul in Derry. People don't know that there was actually an American consul in Derry during the 1830s, and he lived in Boom Hall. And he was appointed from the Secretary of State in Washington. He lived in Boom Hall. During the Act of Union, Cornwallis visited Boom Hall to discuss the Act of Union. So this is a place of significance in the city, and we shouldn't just, put a zinc smelter on it. We need to recognise it and interpret it and teach people about where we've come from, because where we've come from helps us to know where we should be going. So that's the point, is this is a very important place historically. The second reason that this is an important place is because it is in a location where half of the most deprived areas in Northern Ireland are. The life expectancy, the health outcomes for people in the city, in our city, is fairly bad. Some of you are local, you'll know all about it, because you'll have lived with that, trying to deal with that over the years. And what the beauty of Boom Hall is, it is so central to the city that anybody can walk to it from any of these areas and use it. It is open to everybody. It is the most important artery from between Donegal and the north of Ireland. There's over 30,000 trips a day on the Foyle Bridge right beside us. So this is accessible to everybody from both sides of the River Foyle. Anybody will feel safe and free to come there to interact. And we see this as a place where communities can come together and do things which are non-contentious things to do with helping the environment, helping people be healthy. No one's any concerns about those, and they're not politically contentious. So the point is, we're trying to make this the place where communities can come together and do these programs in association with the 18 partners that we have. So it is a most accessible place. So that's 3 points, really, that it's an important site because it has historic importance that we should never forget. It has accessible by people who are in communities in distress. And the third thing is that it is very accessible for communities from all over Northern Ireland who can come there at the point of the Foyle Bridge. So the next thing is, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to restore the house, the stables, the walled garden, and the landscapes around there. And that will be done over a period of 10 years. It will be a phased programme, and we will spin each plate as we do it and get everything working properly over a period, in consultation and in agreement with the council and with our community organisations backing us. And the whole project will costed at last quarter to 2024. The whole project would, that's the house, mansion house, the stables, the wall garden, and the landscapes. The total thing is costed at the current costs at about £18 million. That includes VAT, and it includes a 25% optimism bias. So people do tend to be optimistic when they have their projects in. So the point is that the people we have on our board are very experienced project managers. Jim Salmon, who's our chairman, was involved in the Titanic project in Belfast from the outset. So we people have great experience in dealing with costs and managing them and making sure that projects come in on time, large-scale projects. And this is a lot smaller than some of the projects some of the people on this board have been involved with before. So that's what we are going to do. We're providing our expertise, and to date we would say that our trustees have provided over £500,000 worth of gratis services to the project to get it to this stage. And we were very careful to make sure that we had 2 Scottish people on the board to teach us the value of a penny. And we're not allowed to spend any money. Karen's one of them. So the point is that... I'm a profligate Scot, I'm sorry. Yeah, but the great thing about it is that we have had such support from the local community that people like the Greater Shantallow Area Partnership have provided their resources to it, and from every community we have had help from all the resources of organisations that are egging us on. So when are we going to do it? Well, there's an outline planning application currently on the go in the city, and we anticipate that by October we will have an outline planning application through, depending on whether the council agree with this, but we've had no negative feedback so far. But we would anticipate by October of this year we will have an outline planning application through for the mansion house of Boom Hall. The stables is another day's work. That has to be a full application because that's a listed building. That will be phased at another phase in the project. And then the wall gardens and the landscapes over a period of time, they will be integrated into these proposals that we're doing. So we anticipate that over a 10-year period we will be able to bring this resource back to the people of the city and to make it usable, so they'll be able to come and stay there. There'll be accommodation, and it'll be especially designed so that families and people with disabilities can come and stay. That's a very major part of our brief. We want to make this landscape accessible, particularly for people with disabilities, because I constantly hear about how people can't enjoy the landscape because there's no toileting facilities for people with wheelchairs, and there's no, people can't stay overnight and all the rest of it. So we've designed it for carers to come. We've designed it to stay. We've designed it so that there's toileting facilities and showering facilities when people are out simply viewing the landscape. And if they want to stay, there is accommodation for them. There are meeting rooms where they can stay. If there's festivals on the city, people will be able to come to use the facility. And in the basement floor at the outset, we will have a nature nursery for young children, and they will be raised in a nature environment and taught things like empathy and being able to deal with traumas and all that sort of thing. And we have got partners who are specialists in this field, the Institute of Child Education and Psychology in Maynooth, who teach all the teachers in the Republic of Ireland and across the world about disabilities and how to handle things like autism and dyslexia and all of those sort of things. They are a partner of ours, and they will be designing some of our programs, and we'll be assisting our program partners to do something a little bit more than they've done before, because our principle is that we'll do these community things, but we'll learn from them and we'll involve the academics in these things. So what else have I got to say there? So the idea is that we would have this operational with, once we get our planning application and our funding through, it would only take about 2 years, I think, Karen? Is that too optimistic? She's done this and got the T-shirt. So it always takes longer than you think. Yeah, it always takes longer. But while the planning applications are going on, we will be doing this preparatory work behind the scenes so that it will be ready, spade ready, as people like to say, to go. So why are we here today? We are making an application to Shared Island, and they have asked us to consult with you and to get your thoughts on this and get your opinions on this. We've sent a letter to the Minister asking him to come down and see the site and to exchange views with us on that. and we don't know what the protocol is here, but whatever influence you have on the minister, whatever that might be, we're just asking you to exercise it at your discretion. But however, we think it's quite important that you're appraised of what we're doing and why we're doing it and what the proposals are, so that if you want to question anyone or question the minister, you may do so in the full knowledge of what information we're able to give you. So I think that's all I really should say. Mr. Chairman, you can ask these people to answer the hard questions. I'm just here
Thank you, Bart, for a very impassioned and committed and illuminating presentation. I have to say it set it out very, very clearly. I have it now firmly located in my mind's eye. I have to say I'm really I think it's absolutely the right approach, that not only do we preserve history, an important history, but we do it in a way that makes it relevant, and the best way to do that is to make it relevant to the present and how it can play a living, vibrant, breathing role within a community. From my own background in terms of community involvement, that would be something that I would recognise as being very worthwhile. So I'm going to go to members' questions just briefly, and they are stacking up now, so we'll try to keep it brief, but I'm going to Daniel first, then Morris, Melissa, Nicola and Brian.
Thank you, Chair. Bart, thanks very much, and thank you to your colleagues or our guests today. That was an exceptional and uplifting presentation, probably one of the most uplifting presentations I've heard all year. And I want to just put firmly on record our appreciation as public representatives to yourselves for giving up your time, expertise, knowledge, to work on projects such as this. I've been in the Science Stables. It's a fantastic project, and I have wider aspirations for the restoration of other historical elements of Science, and indeed I've been in the Playhouse in Derry, so I've seen firsthand your expertise and experiences play out to the benefit of the wider community. This is very exciting. I'm very familiar with the location. I'm obviously living in the wider council area. I've been from Strabane. And I can see the huge and significant benefits that this would have for the people of the area, but also how it can connect to the wider greenways and etc. that are closely linked by to this particular area. The shared island funding, I was about to ask where the main bulk of funding is about to come through. Maybe you could break that down first, Bart, and how best we can help. Certainly, just to say at the outset, you'll have my support for this as someone with an interest in this particular council area. I do think this is exceptional and exciting, and it takes people like yourselves to push it through and deliver it. So I'll be standing shoulder to shoulder with you and supporting you where I can. And if that includes with the Irish government and the Shared Island Unit, I'll do that, and certainly with the Minister here. So the 18 million is what you've outlined in terms of what is required to deliver this project. So could you break down where the funding mechanisms will come from for that, if that would help?
Right. Well, it's 18 million phased out over 10 years. And sorry, before I say anything, you've reminded me of something. I should have said to you that the Boom Hall project is mentioned in the New Decade, New Approach document, so it is already, I've been aware of it. The project is 18 million phased out over 10 years, and what we would anticipate is that the Shared Island would be asked to make a contribution, and I don't want to preempt what they might offer, but the Heritage Lottery Fund are also very interested in coming in behind us, and the National Trust, by the way, have said that when the building is restored, that they will assist us with furnishing it, because they have warehouses apparently full of furniture that they can't display or use, and they want to come in at the end of this process to help us kit the place out. So there will be contributions like that which aren't necessarily monetary, but what we would see initially would be that between Shared Island and National Heritage, and we have a few community resources around which might contribute to it as well. But that would be start off with the first period would be the first is the Mansion House, for which the outline application is for. That would be a £9 million project initially. Well, but the timing of phasing in the second bit for the stables and the walled garden will depend to some extent on our progress with that first application, and we would hope that those who are with us on the first occasion found it such a good experience that they'd be delighted to go again. So we would anticipate that we would develop partnerships with them. Now, we're not asking the department here for money, but if you found a bit down the back of the sofa, we'd be very, very love to have some.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Morris?
Thank you, Chair. Bart, can I thank you for your enthusiastic presentation? Your passion for the project certainly comes through. Historically, it's very important for Northern Ireland, for Europe. It ties in well to the historical city, and it can be a massive tourism generator because people will want to come and see where the boom was broke. And I think from my own constituency's point of view, there was a Korean ship, supply ship, among the three. Was it the Phoenix?
Yeah.
And so we can link into further down the coast towards the causeway. I can't say any more. I fully support it, especially for the historical interest. And we in this wee country, we knock down historical buildings too quick.
Yes.
Absolutely. This is one that's going to be rebuilt again. So congratulations on the theme.
Yeah.
I wish you well, and I can guarantee you my support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, Morris. Melissa?
Pastor Roserig, you're all very welcome. Agus the Ratches and Samuel Foster and your step is very interesting as well. In fact, whenever you talked there just about the significance in history and all the different residents that you had in Boom Hall, that not all of them now said to be divided opinions on how positive they were towards the people, say, of Ireland and themselves and the roles that they fulfilled whenever they were in Ireland. But without doubt, the Alexanders, to me, would have stood out and the role that they would have adopted at that time in helping the people of Derry. And I can see a Derry, actually the northwest, Donegal and the likes of, because they were coming to there as a result of the famine and so on in particular. But I also see too all the positivity, we say, within this project. But in many ways it sort of reflects something that started in Derry too, with the likes of Paddy Bogside, whenever he had already taken on board that responsibility of redeveloping the inner city in many respects, which was in total and absolute decline, and that many of those buildings are now back to life again and are being utilised, we'll say, as community centres or as office space, and even in some cases as accommodation in that as well. And I can see all the potential, we'll say, within this particular project as well too, that you'll embrace, in fact, all of those aspects. And again too, like some of our other MLAs here, I'm aware of the work in that's already happened in the likes of Sion Mills and so on, and in Derry and the Playhouse and in the Guildhall and places like it as well too. So again, other than to just wish you all the very, very best in the future, and you can be guaranteed I'd be totally supporting you in every respect.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And our Deputy Chair, Nicola.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, the four of you, for coming along here this afternoon and for your presentation. I just want to really reiterate my support to the project. As Daniel said, it is really uplifting. I think we're all got a smile on our face here. It's something different for once, to hear something so positive. So it is very welcome. I particularly liked what you were saying, Bart, around making this accessible for disabled people, and in particular those with additional needs, because very often they're the last thought about, and I'm really glad to hear that they're being thought about already, because it is so difficult for families out there, so it will be a really welcome space for them. And the fact that you're planning for accommodation for Derry, because Derry is a really vibrant city and it's growing and expanding and becoming more lively, so you're ticking all the right boxes there. Yeah, so you've my full support, and I do propose that the committee should write to the Communities Minister and show our support for the Chair Fund.
Thank you, Chair. Our Deputy, and Brian.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation today. Very interesting. I love a bit of history, and you're wanting to revive that history, but also provide a modern purpose for the building. I hadn't heard of it before. I spoke to Gary Middleton, my colleague, this morning, and he mentioned your name, Bart, and spoke well of you and the project. That's so I was taking my lead from him, and no, he was very positive about it. So I know the location. I hadn't heard of it before, but I am doing the Waterside Half Marathon in September, so I know it comes over the bridge and it goes along the path beside Boom Hall. So I'll definitely, if I'm not too knackered by then, I'll look across and see the building then. So I think it'll be a good example for other projects, that want to restore important buildings from the past. So can you just recap, in terms of sustainability, getting the money to restore it is one thing, but having a business plan which is sustainable. Can you just recap briefly the core elements that'll bring in income?
Yeah.
And I'm sure there'll be some public sector involvement, but the less you're relying on public sector funding year after year, the better. So, can you just recap?
The good news is we're not relying on public sector money to run it. And the model is really, really simple. We're going to restore it. First of all, the landscapes are going to be free for everybody to access at any time. We're trying to open this place, not make it difficult for people to go there. And we want everyone to come there. So the actual house itself, once you have the house built, the only issue really is the running costs. And the top 2 stories of the house are to be accommodation, and people pay for that. And it's within the bounds of what people have to pay currently. It's a very simple model. They don't pay anymore. It's not premium over what's already what people pay for in the current accommodation in Derry. The middle floor is a place for events and for places for people to come and meet. And again, there might be a small charge for a meeting room in the normal way that any building would be let out. And there's also a catering facility there, which is also going to double up as training. With some disability organisations have got training plans to train people in catering. And then the basement, or the ground floor, I'm not told never to call it a basement, it's the ground floor which opens out onto the lovely gardens. That will be a nature nursery, and there will be a rental coming off that. So the model is very simple. We have a building which you rent out, and the people who rent it pay a fee for their electricity as they use it, and they pay obviously the rates and whatever is involved there. The tenants will use it. The only intervention we have is that we are encouraging the right kinds of organisations to go in there that are doing things compatible with each other, and that the children are in a safe place and all that. We make sure that all that is set up properly, and the organisations themselves are responsible for keeping themselves viable, and we will vet them before we sublet the building to them. And if it doesn't work out for them, we'll replace it with someone else. So the costs are run by the people who use it, and the capital cost is being provided by a grant primarily. So we've designed this with our Scottish inspiration, not to get into any debt. They don't like it over there in Scotland. They don't like it. So the idea is that as a trust we would get the money up front to do it, and it would be funded in the normal way throughout the project. Our job is to get that project cash flowed, etc., to the very end. And our guys have been doing that for years and years and years. They're quantity surveyors and people like that, so they know what they're doing. So that's our job, is to create that facility. It's the job of the people who use it, just to pay the normal rents or fees or whatever. If they buy a lunch, whatever, they pay for the lunch, and that's what keeps the catering organisation going. So that's how it's sustainable. There isn't a big overhead. Now, the thing you should know about that building is it's over 250 years old, and if once it's restored, it will last for another 250 years. It's 4 feet thick. And there was a time when vandals went in to try and pull it down, and they were mystified as to why they couldn't. And this was years ago, 30 years ago. I got a structural engineer in, and he said that's because when these guys built these buildings, they put oak beams around the tops of the floors, and the oak beams don't break, and they're still there after 250 years, keeping the house sound. And by the way, the house is very fine sound. It only has a few floors to put in and a roof. It's only a fixer-upper, so don't be too worried about the costs. It's not going to be a major event.
Will you do guided tours as well of it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
We'll all look forward to that.
It's not a tourism project per se. We're starting off that this is a community project.
For the use of tours.
We will certainly have it, and we've got a grant from the department for the communities already, and we have Queen's University down there, and the boomstone, which is part of the boom, is still there in front of the house, and we're doing an archaeological piece on that. And there were 2 cannons on either side of it, and we believe we've recovered those. So that's going to be there, so that when people come down, they can touch a piece of the boom, and they can sit on the cannon if they want, but they'll hear the story of how the boom was broken, looking at the site where the boom was. And the King James's Well is there, where King James himself put his tent up. So they'll get a nice little tour around there. It'll be a pleasant walk. So.
Very good.
Thank you. Excellent. I think Brian's pitching for a free tour there, but charge him plenty.
I'll pay.
So finally, Kelly, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. As others have said, it's uplifting to hear that communities still want to have this sort of property that would be available for use. I'm from the other end of the country, the Ards Peninsula, and we have Mount Stewart, and you know of that, that's a tourist offer
Yes.
that the National Trust are very successful with. It doesn't enable the type of thing that you're talking about. I think the closest that I would know that would have been comparable would be Castlewell.
Or Portico.
Well, Portico doesn't have all that wonderful ground around it.
No, it doesn't.
Yes,
It doesn't.
but it's exactly. That's
But I know what you mean.
A
Yeah.
similar type of thing.
Absolutely.
Just what I'm thinking about that is, you've obviously done a heck of a lot of work. You've got your pricings worked out. You've got the sustainability plan there. You've mentioned already that you have secured some money from the Department for Communities. Is that for the business planning purposes, or is it specifically for the historical monument?
Oh, that was a small bit for the historical monument. We haven't made an ask for money from the department as yet. But the next phase of, and part of the shared island application, will be to get the finance to project manage to the next phase for implementation, to the full planning application, the full design brief, to bring in all those things that we talked about disabilities and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So we'll have a full design brief. That's a very expensive business. Now we've kept ourselves right to date. We've paid for everything that we have to have had done, and we've done it with the goodwill of the communities and with a lot of professional people who've given their skills. But it comes a stage when you can ask too many times, and you do have to pay somebody to do something. So that's the next phase that we're in. But we've a few things to set up in the meantime.
And just Shared Island, are they going to require you to provide match funding from elsewhere?
We don't know what they're going to say. At this stage, what they're saying to us is we need permission to be involved here, and we want to know that there's support for it. And that's why we're here today, and that's why we've asked the Minister. And I don't want to preempt what Shared Island's requirements would be. That wouldn't be fair. So I'll let them tell me. You know that the first person who talks loses. You know that. So we
also know go in with a lot more than 18 million. And
yes. Did I say 18? I meant 28.
Slip of the tongue.
Just finally on this, one matter that you haven't brought out is the environmental aspect of the opportunity here.
Yep.
You know, not only is it a historical site, but it can be the lungs of Derry.
Well,
so it would be something that I would be quite keen, because I'm very aware of a number of banks and insurance companies, pension holders, that are looking for investments where they can claim their money through environmental projects. So it might be worthwhile just the environmental aspect, but as the Deputy Chair, Nicola Brogan, has said, I absolutely think that we should, as a committee, write to the Minister to throw our support behind a project such as this. It's not too often these opportunities come up, but I'm a great believer in saving our history for not just ourselves but for the future.
Could I just address that environmental one? It's very interesting. We have Mr. Environment here who ran the Woodland Trust and did things. But first of all, when you restore a building, it takes 50 years for a new building to catch up with an old building in terms of carbon capture, because what you've got in Boom Hall is embodied carbon. To pull it down would be to lose that resource, and it's been calculated that if you restored all the buildings that need to be restored in the UK and Ireland, you would meet your Paris protocols in terms of carbon capture. So one of the ways, it's a new paradigm for development, we're saying, is that taking older buildings, environmentally, taking older buildings and putting them back to good use is a way of saving already embodied carbon without having to reuse new carbon and create a pollution event. We're also planning a tree nursery for the site, and we're working with Woodland Trust and a few others on that. And Patrick, do you want to say anything about the environment? Or?
Yeah, I think whilst the mansion is very, very important and very significant, the 60 acres is quite significant in terms of having that amount of freely accessible open space in any city or town across the province or across the country. So, and it also is the home of some significant trees. So in fact the ancient oaks are there, and it's a very scarce resource because most of them have been cleared from the landscape, but we still have a significant number of ancient trees on the site. So as looking at the landscape, we'd be looking not just to protect them but to enhance them and to plant further trees. But I think the significance of a 60-acre site within a walking distance of the city is just untold.
And biodiversity is one of the shared island objectives too, so I think that all ties in with that. Can I, through the chairman, just add in one comment as somebody who's brought into this trust, and the things that really inspired me? First of all, you've all touched on it. I've done a lot of projects. What you really need is a feisty spirit, and the Boomhall Trust has got that in spades. That's one thing. And the other thing, Mr. Chairman, you said right at the beginning, which I think is so crucial, is this business of the past blending into the future. And I think that's exactly what Boomhall, it's got a wonderful past, but we don't just want to be looking back. It's got the potential to have a brilliant future for all the reasons, the community reasons. And the survey, I have never seen such a, so much connection with the community as the Boomhall Trust have done. So, it's a great project, as you have all very kindly commented. So thank you.
Yep, go ahead.
Just quickly, Chair.
Yep.
I'd like to pick up what Kelly said. This is my interest. It is the lungs for the city. I widen that, Kelly, and I think the walled garden, which is very large, but the natural environment is like a huge natural medicine cabinet for the city. I'm trying to pick up on yours. It's an open-air classroom to learn our histories.
It's an oak grove.
Yes.
Which is the name of the city.
Yeah, and also we're told that the boom stone by one of the last owners was possibly a Neolithic standing stone. So it's a huge history, and it's just right there waiting to be restored. And
Okay, well, listen, that's been really uplifting, I have to say. I'm dying to see it now myself, I have to say. And as I say, I have an interest. We have recently renovated a very old building, maybe 150 years old, for community use in our own part of the community. So I think a lot of what you're saying resonates with me in that sense. And that thing about not making it a museum or putting it behind glass, but making it living, breathing, usable for people. As a committee, and particularly a committee for communities, we don't take a funding of 18 million lightly either in that sense, but I certainly think I'm absolutely committed and behind community investment in community infrastructure, first of all, investment in tourism, investment in the environment, which we've already indicated, and investment into the northwest. So I think on all those fronts it makes it a very suitable project for Shared Island, and absolutely, as the Deputy Chair has proposed, and I will be putting the members now in a minute, I absolutely do support that we write to the Minister. Thank you for coming here today. I know we're going to maybe get a picture with you if you want to take a seat in the public gallery there.
We'll finish up outside.
You can sit, you can sit with you, but we've only a few minutes left of business to conduct here in the meeting. But I thank you very much and wish you all very well with the project.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And could I just thank you for giving us the time and extend an invitation to all of you to come down to Boomhall, and we'll send you each individually an email, and whenever you feel like it or you're up in the city, let us know and we'll take you down and give you even if it's only one of you, we'll give you a single tour on your own, and we won't charge you for it.
Bring your walking boots.
Maybe a future committee will even be able to take use of the conference and go out and meet in Boomhall when you have it.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
So, members, I just want to the Deputy Chair has proposed that we write to the Minister seeking his support for a letter to the Shared Island Fund. Are members content that we do that?
Yes.
Great. Yep. Thank you, members. Clerk, happy enough for that?
Yep.
Okay, members, moving on to agenda item 14, Forward Work Programme, a copy of which is at your at page 532 there. Do members have any comments, or are they content to note the Forward Work Programme? Content, thank you. Any other business? Item 15, any other business today, members? No, thank you. Final agenda item then is item 16, date, time and location of our next meeting. Our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 13th of March 2025 here in room 29. The meeting is now adjourned, and I'll ask the clerk to take us out of broadcasting, and just remind everyone it'll take a few minutes for the broadcasting to come to its conclusion.
Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound.